The frigid waters of Greenland's west coast hit Dr. Elena Vasquez like a wall of ice needles, but she barely noticed anymore. After 3 months studying climate change effects on Arctic marine life, the cold had become just another tool in her scientific arsenal. She surfaced smoothly, her breathing steady despite the 40-degree water temperature. The specialized sonar equipment in her hand was still beeping frantically, the same pattern that had drawn her back to this exact coordinate for the 3rd time this week. Something was down there, something that shouldn't exist in these waters. Elena pulled herself toward the research vessel's ladder, her mind racing through possibilities. In her 5 years as a marine biologist, she discovered new species, documented coral bleaching, and tracked migration patterns across 3 oceans. But this metallic signature 200 feet below the surface was unlike anything in her experience. The readings showed geometric patterns, straight lines, and perfect angles that nature simply didn't create. As she climbed aboard, water streaming from her wetsuit, Elena knew she was on the verge of something extraordinary. The weather in Greenland could turn deadly in minutes, and Elena recognized the signs immediately. The barometric pressure was dropping fast, and the wind had shifted from the northeast, always a bad sign this close to the ice sheet. She moved with practiced efficiency, securing her diving equipment and downloading the sonar data to her waterproof tablet. The metallic signatures were even stronger now, more defined. Whatever was down there was massive, at least 60 feet long, and showing the kind of geometric precision that suggested human construction. But that was impossible. According to every historical record, no major vessels had been lost in these particular waters. Elena glanced at the approaching storm clouds, their dark mass rolling across the ice with frightening speed. She had maybe 20 minutes before the seas became too dangerous for diving operations. Her colleague Marcus would call her reckless for even considering another dive in these conditions. But the readings were too compelling to ignore. The object appeared to be partially embedded in an underwater ice formation, perfectly preserved by the unique Arctic conditions. Elena had specialized in underwater archaeology before focusing on marine biology, and every instinct told her this discovery could rewrite the history books. The storm was coming fast, but some opportunities only came once in a lifetime. Inside the research station's climate-controlled laboratory, Elena spread her sonar data across 3 different monitors, each screen revealing more questions than answers. The storm outside was hammering the station with 60-mile-per-hour winds, but she barely heard it. The geometric patterns on her screens were mesmerizing, perfectly straight lines forming what appeared to be a ship's hull, but with dimensions that didn't match any modern vessel design. Elena pulled up her database of known Arctic shipwrecks, cross-referencing the coordinates with historical records. Nothing. No documented losses in this area for over 200 years. She enhanced the sonar image, adjusting the resolution to capture finer details. What she saw made her hands tremble slightly as she reached for her coffee. The object wasn't just geometric, it showed the distinctive curved lines of an ancient longship design, but that was impossible. Viking expeditions to Greenland were well documented, and none had been lost in these specific waters. Elena had studied Norse maritime archaeology during her graduate work at UC San Diego, focusing on how climate change was revealing previously hidden historical sites. She knew the distinctive hull shapes, the construction techniques, the archaeological signatures. This sonar image matched every detail of a 10th century Norse longship. But if that was true, they'd discovered something that could revolutionize understanding of Viking exploration in the Arctic. Elena had been staring at the comparative data for 3 hours, and the similarities were undeniable. The sonar readings matched the hull dimensions of a 10th century Norse longship with frightening accuracy, 62 feet in length, 16 feet at the beam, with a distinctive shallow draft that allowed Viking ships to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. She pulled up her graduate research on Norse shipbuilding techniques, comparing construction methods with what the sonar was revealing. The object showed the characteristic overlapping plank construction, the distinctive stem and stern posts, even what appeared to be the remains of a steering oar. But the historical records were clear. While Vikings had established settlements in Greenland around 986 CE, no major expeditions were documented as lost in these particular waters. Elena rubbed her tired eyes and leaned back in her chair. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken, but her mind was racing faster than ever. If this really was a Viking longship, it represented an undocumented expedition to an area further north than any previously known Norse exploration. The implications were staggering. Either she'd stumbled onto the archaeological discovery of the century, or her equipment was giving her false readings. Elena looked at the calibration data one more time. Everything checked out perfectly. Her sonar was functioning flawlessly, the depth measurements were accurate, and the images were crystal clear. Tomorrow, weather permitting, she would have to dive down and see for herself what lay beneath 200 feet of Arctic water. The morning after the storm brought crystalline clear skies and glass-smooth waters, perfect diving conditions. Elena called her team together for an emergency briefing, knowing she needed their expertise and support for what she was planning. Kai Tutu sat quietly at the conference table, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. As their local Inuit guide, Kai possessed generational knowledge of these waters that no amount of scientific training could match. Professor Anders, the project's archaeological consultant, leaned forward with intense interest as Elena explained her findings. The elderly Norwegian historian had spent 40 years studying Norse expeditions, and Elena could see the excitement building in his pale blue eyes. Marcus Chen, however, looked skeptical. Her fellow marine biologist had been increasingly competitive about research priorities, especially with funding decisions approaching next month. Elena activated the war monitor and displayed her enhanced sonar images. The geometric patterns were unmistakable now, clearly artificial, clearly ancient, and clearly significant. "This appears to be a Norse longship," she began, watching their faces carefully. "Preserved in an underwater ice formation approximately 200 feet down." Kai's expression didn't change, but Elena noticed his grip tighten slightly on his coffee mug. Professor Anders practically vibrated with excitement. "The dimensions match perfectly with 10th century construction techniques," he said, adjusting his glasses to study the images more closely. Marcus, however, shook his head. "Elena, we're here to study climate change impacts, not chase archaeological fantasies." The tension in the room was palpable as Marcus continued his objections, his voice rising with each word. "Elena, we have specific research objectives here. Climate monitoring, ice sheet measurements, marine ecosystem documentation. We're not treasure hunters chasing fantasies." His tone was sharper than usual, and Elena could see the stress lines around his eyes deepening. Marcus had been under intense pressure from the funding committee to produce publishable results, and an archaeological side quest could derail his entire career trajectory. The funding review was only weeks away, and negative evaluations could end research careers permanently. But Elena had spent too many years in academic research to back down from a discovery this significant. Her heart was racing, but her voice remained steady. "Marcus, I understand your concerns about our mission parameters, but this could be the find of the century. If we're looking at an undocumented Viking expedition, it changes everything we know about Norse exploration patterns. This isn't mission drift, it's mission evolution." Professor Anders practically bounced in his chair with excitement. "Elena's absolutely right. The historical implications are staggering. Vikings reaching this far north would suggest their maritime capabilities were far more advanced than current scholarship suggests. This could rewrite textbooks." The academic rivalry was becoming uncomfortable when Kai finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made everyone stop arguing and listen. "My grandfather's grandfather told stories about the old ships under the ice. Our people have always known they were there." The room fell dead silent. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air, and she could see Marcus's skeptical expression shifting to something approaching awe. "Kai," Elena said carefully, "are you saying your people have traditional knowledge about this exact site?" The Inuit guide nodded slowly, his weathered hands gripping his coffee mug tighter. "Some stories should stay stories, but some stories are also true, and maybe it's time for this truth to be shared." After the heated meeting, Elena found Kai on the observation deck, studying the ice formations with the patient gaze of someone who had read the Arctic's moods for decades. She approached carefully, knowing that pushing for information would be counterproductive. In her months working with Kai, she'd learned that traditional knowledge keepers shared wisdom according to their own timelines, not scientific schedules. "Kai," she began gently, "I don't want to pressure you, but if your people have knowledge about what's down there, it could be incredibly important for understanding Arctic history." The wind carried the scent of ice and salt water as Kai considered her words. Finally, he turned to face her, his dark eyes reflecting years of careful thought. "Dr. Vasquez, my family has been on this land for over 1,000 years. We remember the time when the ice people came from across the water in their long boats. They were not like the other visitors who came later. These ones learned our ways, respected our knowledge." Elena felt her heart racing. "Ice people? You mean Vikings?" "They actually made contact with Inuit communities." Kai nodded slowly. "They called us the Ice People. We called them the Wood People because of their great wooden ships. They stayed for several seasons, learning how to read the ice, how to find food in the frozen lands. In return, they shared their knowledge of working metal, of navigating by the stars." Elena's mind reeled with the implications. This wasn't just an archaeological discovery. It was evidence of cultural exchange that predated documented Norse indigenous contact by centuries. 2 hours later, Elena was suited up and conducting final equipment checks with Kai's assistance. Her diving gear included specialized underwater archaeology tools, high-resolution cameras, measurement devices, and sampling equipment that could document artifacts without disturbing their positions. Kai had agreed to assist with the dive, but only under strict conditions. "This site is sacred to my people," he had explained. "The Wood People and Ice People made agreements here. We must approach with respect." Elena understood completely. Archaeological sites weren't just scientific opportunities, they were cultural heritage that deserved careful, respectful investigation. She checked her underwater camera system one final time, ensuring the lighting would be adequate for proper documentation. The water conditions were perfect, minimal current, excellent visibility, and the ice formations would provide natural reference points for navigation. "Kai, I want you to know that whatever we find down there, your people's knowledge and perspectives will be central to how we interpret and share this discovery," Elena said, as she adjusted her diving mask. The Inuit guide nodded approvingly. "That is good." "Too often, outsiders find our history and tell it without asking us what it means." Elena checked her depth gauge and breathing apparatus one final time. At 200 feet, she would have limited bottom time before decompression requirements forced her to surface. But if Kai's traditional knowledge was accurate, she was about to witness evidence of cultural exchange that could revolutionize understanding of both Norse exploration and indigenous Arctic history. The descent through Arctic waters was like traveling through liquid crystal. Elena's diving lights cut through the pristine water, illuminating ice formations that had been sculpted by centuries of current and temperature changes. At 50 feet, she could already make out the geometric shapes that had appeared on her sonar readings. At 100 feet, the outline became unmistakable, the distinctive curved lines of a Norse longship, partially embedded in an underwater ice shelf that had preserved it in remarkable condition. Elena's heart pounded as she approached the archaeological site, her camera automatically documenting every detail. The preservation was extraordinary. The ship's wooden hull showed minimal decay, protected by the unique Arctic conditions that had essentially frozen it in time. She could see the overlapping plank construction, the iron rivets still in place, even the distinctive carved dragon head at the prow. But as Elena swam closer, she noticed details that made her catch her breath in amazement. The ship wasn't empty. Scattered throughout the hull were objects that clearly didn't belong to any standard Viking expedition she'd studied. Strange crystalline formations that appeared to be artificial, navigation tools that seemed far too advanced for 10th century technology, and what looked like collaborative artwork showing both Norse and indigenous design elements. Elena began her systematic documentation process, photographing everything in careful detail before disturbing anything. But even from her initial observations, she could tell this wasn't just a shipwreck. It was evidence of cultural exchange and technological collaboration that historians had never imagined possible. Swimming carefully into the longship's preserved interior, Elena felt like she was entering a time capsule from 1,000 years ago. Her underwater lights revealed details that took her breath away, not just the remarkable preservation of the wooden structure, but the artifacts that filled the ship's hold. Navigation instruments lay scattered across what appeared to be a chart table, their bronze and iron construction showing techniques that were centuries ahead of documented Norse capabilities. Elena photographed everything methodically, knowing that each image might hold clues to understanding this extraordinary discovery. But the most remarkable finds were the crystalline objects, geometric formations that were clearly artificial, but unlike anything from medieval European technology. They appeared to be navigation aids or possibly astronomical instruments, their faceted surfaces reflecting her diving lights in complex patterns. Elena moved carefully around the ship's interior, documenting the position of every artifact before beginning collection procedures. Carved into the ship's wooden ribs were symbols that made her heart race with excitement, Norse runes intertwined with markings that looked distinctly Inuit in origin. This wasn't just a Norse expedition ship. It was evidence of active collaboration between Viking explorers and indigenous Arctic peoples. Elena checked her dive computer. She'd been down for 25 minutes and needed to begin collecting samples soon to maintain safe decompression limits. But every moment revealed new evidence of a historical partnership that could completely rewrite the understanding of Arctic exploration and cultural exchange in medieval times. Elena worked with the methodical precision of a trained underwater archaeologist, documenting the exact position of each artifact before carefully placing it in waterproof collection containers. The navigation instruments were her priority, bronze astrolabes that showed mathematical sophistication far beyond what she'd expected from 10th century Norse technology. But as she examined them more closely, Elena realized why they were so advanced. These weren't purely Norse designs. They incorporated indigenous knowledge of Arctic navigation, blending European metalworking with traditional Inuit understanding of ice patterns and seasonal changes. One particular instrument caught her attention, a circular bronze device with markings that clearly showed both runic inscriptions and Inuit pictographs. Elena photographed it from multiple angles before collecting it, recognizing that this single artifact could provide evidence of technological collaboration between two cultures that historians had assumed never met as equals. The crystalline objects were equally fascinating. They appeared to be some form of optical navigation aids, their precisely cut surfaces designed to capture and refract light in ways that could help determine direction and position. Elena had never seen anything like them in medieval European archaeology, but they reminded her of traditional Inuit snow goggles, protective eyewear carved from bone or antler with precision slits to prevent snow blindness. These crystalline versions seemed to serve a similar protective function while also providing navigational assistance. Elena checked her air supply and decompression requirements. She had enough time to collect a few more critical samples before beginning her ascent, but already she knew this discovery would change everything scholars thought they knew about Arctic exploration and indigenous European contact in medieval times. Elena's hands trembled as she opened the expedition log's final entries, her underwater lights illuminating runic inscriptions that would change everything historians thought they knew about Arctic exploration. The writing was increasingly urgent, almost desperate. The ice people have warned us of the great cold coming. We must preserve the shared knowledge before the alliance ends. Elena's heart raced as she translated further. Thorvald speaks truth. We have learned more in these seasons with the ice people than in all our years sailing southern seas. Their wisdom of the frozen lands, combined with our knowledge of star paths and metal craft, has created wonders neither people could achieve alone. But it was the final passage that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. The young ones from both peoples now speak each other's tongues, share each other's knowledge, marry across the great divide. Perhaps this is how all peoples should meet, not as conquerors and conquered, but as teachers and students, each offering gifts the other lacks. Elena photographed each tablet with reverent care, understanding that she was documenting the most remarkable example of medieval cultural exchange ever discovered. The expedition hadn't been a raid or a desperate escape. It had been a deliberate diplomatic mission that had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The log described joint ceremonies honoring both Norse and Inuit spiritual traditions, collaborative hunting expeditions that fed both communities through harsh winters, and the gradual development of hybrid technologies that combine European metalworking with Arctic survival expertise. One entry made Elena smile despite the frigid water around her. Eric's son now builds ice houses better than men twice his age, while Siku's daughter forges iron tools that would make the smiths of Trondheim weep with envy. The ice people and wood people are becoming one people, wiser than either alone. Elena checked her air supply and decompression time. She had enough to collect a few more crucial samples, but already she knew this discovery would revolutionize understanding of cultural contact, technological exchange, and human cooperation in ways that went far beyond archaeology or medieval history. Elena began her controlled ascent, following strict decompression procedures while carefully managing her precious cargo of artifacts and documentation. The collection containers were secured to her equipment harness, each one containing evidence that could revolutionize understanding of medieval Arctic exploration. As she rose through the crystal-clear water, Elena's mind raced with the implications of what she discovered. The longship wasn't just a Norse vessel. It was proof of sustained cultural collaboration between Vikings and Inuit peoples, documented technological exchange, and evidence of exploration far beyond what historians had previously imagined possible. At her first decompression stop, Elena hovered at 50 feet, watching the preserved longship recede into the depths below. The site would need extensive archaeological excavation, but it would have to be done with full collaboration from Kai's people and respect for their traditional knowledge. Elena checked her dive computer and continued her ascent, knowing that the artifacts in her collection containers would soon spark intense academic debate and probably significant political interest as well. The surface seemed impossibly far above, but Elena maintained her discipline, following decompression tables precisely. These artifacts were too important to risk losing to diving accidents caused by impatience or excitement. At her second decompression stop, Elena began planning her next steps. The discovery would need to be reported, but to whom? Academic institutions, government agencies, and indigenous communities all had legitimate interests in how this site was studied and interpreted. Elena had learned enough about cultural politics during her graduate work to know that managing the social and political aspects of this discovery would be just as challenging as the archaeological work itself. Elena's head broke the surface of the Arctic water into brilliant sunshine, the contrast making her blink as she floated beside the research vessel's ladder. Kai was already reaching down to help with her equipment, his weathered face showing a mixture of anticipation and concern that Elena had come to associate with traditional knowledge keepers facing the confirmation of ancestral stories. The old stories were true, weren't they? Kai asked quietly as Elena handed up her collection containers. Elena nodded, still catching her breath from the long ascent. More than true, Kai. What your people preserved in oral tradition matches exactly what I found down there. This isn't just a Norse shipwreck. It's evidence of collaboration, of technological exchange, of partnerships that historians never imagined existed. As Elena climbed aboard, she could see the relief and validation in Kai's eyes. Traditional knowledge had often been dismissed by academic researchers, but this discovery proved that indigenous oral histories could preserve accurate information across centuries with remarkable precision. Elena carefully secured her sample containers and began the process of documenting her dive log, noting exact collection locations, environmental conditions, and preliminary observations. Kai, your people's knowledge was essential to understanding this site. Whatever happens next, your community needs to be central to how this story gets told. The Inuit guide nodded approvingly. My grandmother always said that some truths wait generations to be ready for sharing. Maybe this one is finally ready. Elena looked back at the water, where the longship lay preserved in its ice tomb, knowing that her dive had been just the beginning of unraveling a 1,000-year-old story of cultural cooperation in the Arctic. On the research vessel's deck, Elena and Kai spread the recovered artifacts across her examination table, each piece more remarkable than the last under the bright Arctic sunlight. The navigation instruments showed craftsmanship that neither Norse nor Inuit cultures could have achieved independently. Bronze astrolabes incorporating traditional Arctic wayfinding knowledge, compass roses that included indigenous seasonal indicators, and measuring devices that blended European mathematical precision with Inuit understanding of ice behavior and animal migration patterns. Elena used a high-powered magnifying glass to examine the runic inscriptions more closely, while Kai studied the indigenous markings with the trained eye of someone who had learned traditional symbolism from his elders. Dr. Vasquez, these symbols here. Kai pointed to markings along the edge of a bronze navigation disc. They represent the different types of ice formations, the safe passages, the seasonal timing for travel. My grandfather taught me these same symbols. Elena nodded excitedly, documenting Kai's interpretation with her camera. And these runic inscriptions describe the same information from the Norse perspective. They were learning your people's ice navigation techniques and recording them in their own writing system. The crystalline objects were equally fascinating. Under magnification, Elena could see that they were precision-cut optical devices, designed to reduce glare and enhance visibility in Arctic conditions while also serving as navigation aids. Kai examined one carefully, turning it in the sunlight. This reminds me of traditional snow goggles, but much more advanced. Our ancestors carved bone and antler for eye protection, but this level of precision... Elena smiled. This level of precision required both cultures working together, your people's understanding of Arctic optics combined with Norse skill in cutting and polishing materials. Back in the research station's laboratory, Elena presented her preliminary findings to Professor Anders and Marcus, the artifacts arranged under proper lighting, while her underwater photographs filled multiple monitors. Professor Anders could barely contain his excitement, adjusting his glasses repeatedly as he studied each piece of evidence. Elena, this is extraordinary. The level of technological collaboration you've documented here challenges every assumption about medieval Norse indigenous contact. These navigation instruments show mathematical sophistication that we never attributed to either culture working independently. Marcus, however, maintained his skeptical distance, his arms crossed as he studied the artifacts with a critical eye. Elena, I'm not questioning your diving skills or your documentation, but the implications of what you're suggesting are enormous. Cultural collaboration between Vikings and Inuit peoples, advanced navigation technology in the 10th century. The academic community is going to demand extraordinary proof for extraordinary claims. Elena had anticipated this reaction, especially from Marcus, whose competitive nature often made him resistant to discoveries that might overshadow his own research. Marcus, I understand your skepticism, but look at the evidence. The runic inscriptions clearly reference ice peoples and technological exchange. The indigenous markings on these navigation tools match traditional Inuit symbols for ice navigation, and Kai's oral traditions describe exactly what I found in that longship. Anders nodded enthusiastically. Elena's right, Marcus. Oral traditions have proven remarkably accurate for preserving historical information across centuries. This discovery validates indigenous knowledge systems while revealing new aspects of Norse exploration that written records never documented. Elena could see Marcus wavering, his scientific training warring with his competitive instincts. The evidence was too compelling to dismiss, but accepting it meant acknowledging a discovery that would likely overshadow his climate research work. Later that evening, Marcus cornered Elena in the research station's corridor, his frustration finally boiling over. Elena, do you have any idea what you're risking here? We have specific objectives, specific funding commitments. The Climate Research Committee expects results on ice sheet monitoring and marine ecosystem documentation, not archaeological fantasies. Elena remained calm, though she could feel her own irritation rising. She'd worked with competitive colleagues before, but Marcus's reaction seemed driven by something beyond scientific skepticism. Marcus, this discovery doesn't interfere with our climate work. If anything, it enhances it. We're looking at evidence of medieval climate conditions, historical Arctic navigation, cultural adaptation to environmental changes. This is multidisciplinary research at its best. Marcus shook his head angrily. That's not how funding committees see it, Elena. They want focused, publishable results in predetermined areas. Archaeological side projects look like mission drift, lack of focus, inability to meet objectives. This could hurt all of our careers. Elena finally understood what was driving Marcus's opposition. The funding review was scheduled for next month, and Marcus had been under pressure to produce significant results that would secure continued financing for his research projects. An archaeological discovery that diverted attention and resources from climate work could indeed be seen as problematic by administrators focused on measurable outcomes in predetermined categories. "Marcus, I understand your concerns about funding," Elena said carefully, "but we can't ignore a discovery this significant. The ethical and scientific implications are too important. We'll find a way to present this that enhances rather than threatens our climate research objectives." But even as she said it, Elena knew that managing the political aspects of this discovery would be just as challenging as the scientific work itself. Elena worked late into the Arctic night, the station's warm lighting creating a cocoon of scholarly activity, while the endless daylight outside filtered through heavy curtains. She had spread reference materials across 3 different work surfaces, comparing runic inscriptions with traditional Inuit symbols, cross-referencing archaeological databases with oral tradition documentation, and planning the next phase of research that would be needed to fully understand this remarkable discovery. The wooden tablets from the ship's log required careful translation work, but Elena's graduate training in Old Norse was proving invaluable. The expedition leader, Thorvald Eriksson, had documented not just the practical aspects of Norse-Inuit cooperation, but also the cultural and philosophical exchanges that had taken place during their months of collaboration. One particularly fascinating passage described joint ceremonies that honored both Norse and Inuit spiritual traditions, while another detailed the mathematical principles behind their collaborative navigation techniques. Elena cross-referenced Thorvald's descriptions with Kai's traditional knowledge, finding remarkable consistency between written Norse records and oral Inuit traditions passed down through generations. The evidence was overwhelming. This hadn't been a brief encounter between 2 cultures, but sustained collaboration that had produced technological innovations neither group could have achieved independently. Elena checked her watch and realized she'd been working for 6 hours straight, but the implications of the discovery kept her energized. She was looking at proof that medieval cultural exchange in the Arctic had been far more sophisticated and collaborative than any historian had previously imagined. The question now was how to present this information in a way that honored both cultures while advancing scientific understanding of Arctic exploration and indigenous knowledge systems. As Elena continued translating the expedition log, she discovered references that made her heart race with new possibilities. Thorvald's records described not just the longship and its collaborative artifacts, but an entire hidden cave system beneath the coastal ice, where the Norse-Inuit partnership had established what he called the Green Sanctuary. The runic descriptions were tantalizingly detailed: underground chambers warmed by geothermal activity, protected spaces where both cultures had stored knowledge and resources, and what appeared to be a collaborative center for astronomical observations and navigation planning. Elena cross-referenced Thorvald's geographical descriptions with modern topographical maps of the Greenland coastline, trying to identify the cave system's location. The Norse navigator had used landmark descriptions that were remarkably precise, referencing distinctive ice formations, coastal features, and sightline measurements that could still be verified today. What made Elena's discovery even more extraordinary was Thorvald's repeated references to guardians of the deep knowledge, apparently indigenous knowledge keepers who had shared astronomical and navigational wisdom that greatly enhanced Norse exploration capabilities. The log described joint observations of stellar patterns, collaborative mapping of ocean currents, and the development of prediction methods for ice formation and animal migration that combined European and indigenous scientific traditions. Elena realized she was looking at evidence of the earliest documented collaborative scientific research in the Arctic, predating modern concepts of interdisciplinary and cross-cultural academic cooperation by nearly 1,000 years. The Green Sanctuary apparently represented a permanent research station where both cultures had worked together to advance their understanding of Arctic navigation, astronomy, and environmental science. Elena checked her translation work one more time, knowing that if she could locate this cave system, it might contain preserved records and artifacts that would provide even more detailed evidence of medieval Arctic scientific collaboration. Elena found Kai on the observation deck at dawn, watching the Arctic light transform the ice formations from deep blue to brilliant white. She approached carefully, knowing that her request would require sensitive cultural navigation. The ship's log translations were tucked under her arm, but she wanted to present them respectfully, acknowledging that what she'd discovered in Norse records might correspond to sites that were sacred to Kai's people. Kai, I've been working on translating more of the expedition log, and I found references to what Thorvald called the Green Sanctuary, apparently a cave system where the Norse and Inuit communities conducted collaborative research. Kai's expression grew thoughtful, his weathered hands gripping the deck railing as he considered Elena's words. Dr. Vasquez, some places in our traditional knowledge are protected sites, not secrets, but places that require proper approach, proper respect, proper permissions from the community. Elena nodded, understanding the cultural protocols involved. During her graduate work, she'd learned that indigenous communities often maintain detailed knowledge about archaeological sites while protecting them from exploitation or disrespectful investigation. Kai, I want to make sure we approach this correctly. If these sites are culturally significant to your people, then your community needs to be involved in every decision about how they're studied or shared. The Inuit guide studied Elena's face, assessing her sincerity and cultural awareness. The old stories speak of the collaboration caves, the places where ice people and wood people shared knowledge about the stars, the ice, the movements of animals. These are not just historical sites, they are places where our ancestors learned wisdom that we still use today. Elena felt a thrill of confirmation, but also a deep sense of responsibility. She was on the verge of documenting collaborative scientific traditions that had continued through indigenous knowledge systems for 1,000 years. After an hour of careful conversation, Kai made his decision. Dr. Vasquez, I will take you to the collaboration sites, but only under certain conditions. My cousin Martha represents our community on the Cultural Heritage Council. She must approve any research or documentation, and whatever we find must be presented to our people first, before any academic or government institutions. Elena agreed immediately, recognizing that Kai was offering her an extraordinary privilege, access to protected cultural sites that his people had safeguarded for generations. Kai, I completely understand and respect those conditions. This research should serve your community's interests, not just academic curiosity. As they prepared for the expedition, Elena packed her most sophisticated archaeological documentation equipment, high-resolution cameras, precision measurement tools, environmental monitoring devices, and sample collection materials. Kai gathered traditional Arctic travel gear that had been tested by generations of Arctic survival, along with modern safety equipment that would ensure their expedition remained safe in the harsh Greenland environment. Elena watched Kai's preparations with fascination, noting how he seamlessly blended traditional knowledge with contemporary safety protocols. His selection of route-finding tools, emergency supplies, and weather monitoring equipment reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom about Arctic travel survival. How far are these sites from the research station? Elena asked, as she secured her documentation equipment in waterproof cases. Kai consulted what appeared to be mental calculations based on weather patterns, ice conditions, and seasonal timing. If the ice conditions remain stable, we can reach the first site by late afternoon. But Dr. Vasquez, these places have been protected by secrecy for good reasons. The collaboration between our peoples was sacred work. It must be approached with proper respect. The trek across Greenland's ice formations was like traveling through a cathedral made of crystal and stone. Elena followed Kai's lead as he navigated routes that were invisible to her but clearly well known to someone with traditional knowledge of this landscape. Every step demonstrated the accumulated wisdom of generations of Arctic travelers. Kai's route selection avoided dangerous ice conditions, took advantage of natural windbreaks, and maintained steady progress toward their destination while conserving energy for the long journey. Elena carried her documentation equipment in a specialized pack designed for archaeological fieldwork in extreme conditions. The weight was significant, but she knew that properly documenting these collaboration sites would require the full range of her professional tools. As they traveled, Kai shared stories about the landscape that provided cultural context for what they were seeking. "This area has always been special to our people," he explained, pointing to distinctive rock formations that served as natural landmarks. The Ice People and Wood People chose this location because it provided protection from storms, access to fresh water, and clear sightlines for astronomical observations. Elena was struck by how Kai's description matched details from Thorvald's expedition log. The Norse navigator had noted the same geographical advantages, describing how the cave system's location made it ideal for collaborative research and cultural exchange. After 3 hours of steady travel, Elena could see their destination, a series of rocky outcroppings partially covered by ice formations, with what appeared to be natural cave openings protected from wind and weather. As they approached, Elena felt the same mixture of excitement and reverence that she'd experienced diving to the longship site. She was about to enter spaces where two cultures had worked together 1,000 years ago to advance human knowledge and understanding. The cave entrance was partially concealed by ice formations that had provided natural protection for centuries, but Elena could immediately see evidence of human modification, carefully placed stones that directed water flow away from the opening, carved symbols that marked the site as culturally significant, and what appeared to be constructed windbreaks that enhanced the natural shelter. Kai paused at the entrance, conducting what Elena recognized as traditional acknowledgement protocols, a moment of respectful recognition for the ancestors who had worked and learned in this place. Elena waited patiently, understanding that entering this site required proper cultural approach, not just archaeological enthusiasm. "Dr. Vasquez, this place holds the memories of our peoples working together," Kai said softly. "My great-grandmother told stories of the collaboration caves, where ice people and wood people shared knowledge about reading the stars, predicting the weather, understanding the movements of animals and ice." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of cultural responsibility as she prepared her documentation equipment. "Kai, I want to record everything in a way that honors both traditions, the scientific knowledge that was developed here and the cultural protocols that have protected this site." As they entered the cave system, Elena's LED lights revealed spaces that had been carefully modified by human hands. The natural cave chambers had been enhanced with constructed walls, organized storage areas, and what appeared to be dedicated spaces for specific types of collaborative work. The preservation was remarkable. The Arctic environment had protected organic materials, metal artifacts, and even what looked like written records from both cultures. Elena began her systematic documentation process, knowing that every detail could provide evidence of medieval collaborative science that had been preserved by indigenous knowledge systems for 1,000 years. The main cave chamber took Elena's breath away. Her lights revealed a space that functioned as a sophisticated research laboratory from 1,000 years ago, organized work areas, carefully arranged tools and instruments, and wall carvings that documented collaborative scientific observations in both Norse runes and Inuit symbols. The preservation was extraordinary. Wooden tools showed minimal decay, metal instruments maintained their functionality, and organic materials had been protected by the cave's stable temperature and low humidity. Elena moved carefully through the space, documenting everything before disturbing any artifacts. The chamber was organized into distinct work areas that clearly reflected collaborative purposes. One section contained astronomical instruments that combined Norse metalworking with Inuit knowledge of stellar observation, sophisticated devices for tracking seasonal changes, predicting weather patterns, and navigation timing that neither culture could have developed independently. Another area showed evidence of collaborative mapping projects, carved stone tablets that recorded ocean currents, ice formation patterns, and animal migration routes using combined Norse and Inuit documentation systems. Elena photographed everything methodically, while Kai provided cultural context that brought the ancient collaboration to life. "Dr. Vasquez, these carvings here show the traditional timing for different types of travel. The seasonal patterns our people learn by observing over many generations. And these metal tools, they show how the wood people's metalworking was adapted to create instruments for Arctic conditions." Elena nodded excitedly, recognizing that she was documenting the earliest known collaborative scientific research facility in the Arctic, where two cultures had combined their knowledge systems to advance understanding of astronomy, navigation, meteorology, and environmental science centuries before such interdisciplinary collaboration became standard in academic research. In the deepest section of the cave system, Elena discovered what could only be described as a medieval astronomical observatory. The chamber ceiling had been carefully modified to allow starlight access through precisely calculated openings, while the walls were covered with carved star charts that showed collaborative celestial observations of remarkable accuracy for the 10th century. Elena's lights illuminated bronze instruments that combined Norse metalworking precision with Inuit traditional knowledge of Arctic sky patterns, sophisticated devices for tracking stellar movements, predicting seasonal changes, and calculating navigation timing that represented the pinnacle of medieval astronomical collaboration. Kai studied the wall carvings with the trained eye of someone who had learned traditional star knowledge from his elders. Dr. Vasquez, these charts show constellations that our people have used for navigation for countless generations, but they also include star patterns that the wood people brought from their southern lands. Together, they created more complete maps of the sky than either people had alone. Elena photographed the astronomical instruments and star charts methodically, recognizing their extraordinary historical significance. The collaborative observatory represented scientific achievement that wouldn't be matched in European astronomy for several more centuries. The precision of the stellar observations, the mathematical sophistication of the tracking instruments, and the integration of multiple cultural knowledge systems demonstrated that medieval Norse-Inuit collaboration had produced genuine scientific advances. One wall contained particularly fascinating carvings, detailed predictions of weather patterns, ice formation timing, and animal migration schedules that combined Norse mathematical calculation methods with traditional Inuit environmental observation techniques. Elena realized she was looking at evidence of predictive environmental science that had been developed through cultural collaboration 1,000 years before climate science became a formal academic discipline. In a carefully protected alcove, Elena and Kai discovered the true treasure of the collaboration caves, extensive written records that documented the research methods, shared discoveries, and cultural exchange protocols that had governed Norse, Inuit scientific cooperation. The documents were preserved in multiple formats: carved stone tablets for permanent records, wooden tablets for working notes, and even some parchment materials that had survived the Arctic conditions with remarkable integrity. Elena worked with her magnification equipment to study the written materials, while Kai translated the traditional symbols and provided cultural context for indigenous knowledge systems referenced in the collaborative records. The documentation revealed a level of systematic scientific methodology that was centuries ahead of its time. The Norse-Inuit partnership had developed standardized observation protocols, systematic recording methods, and verification procedures that ensured the accuracy of their shared research. One particularly fascinating document described collaborative experiments in navigation accuracy, tests that compared traditional Inuit ice reading techniques with Norse astronomical navigation, leading to hybrid methods that achieved greater precision than either approach alone. Another set of records documented collaborative weather prediction systems that combined Norse mathematical calculations with traditional Inuit environmental indicators, creating forecasting capabilities that were remarkably sophisticated for the medieval period. Elena photographed each document carefully, while Kai provided running translation and cultural interpretation. Dr. Vasquez, these records show that our ancestors didn't just share knowledge, they developed new knowledge together, using methods that honored both traditions while creating something neither could achieve independently. Elena nodded, realizing that she was documenting evidence of collaborative scientific methodology that challenged assumptions about medieval research capabilities and demonstrated that interdisciplinary, cross-cultural collaboration had produced genuine scientific advances 1,000 years ago. In the cave's deepest storage chamber, Elena and Kai made a discovery that connected directly to her own climate research work, evidence that the Norse-Inuit collaboration had developed sophisticated environmental monitoring systems that predated modern climate science by nearly 1,000 years. The chamber contained carefully preserved ice core samples, sediment collections, and environmental data that represented systematic long-term observation of Arctic climate patterns. Elena's hands trembled as she examined ice cores that had been collected and preserved using techniques that wouldn't be redeveloped by European science until the 20th century. Kai studied the environmental records with traditional knowledge that provided crucial interpretation for understanding the collaborative climate monitoring system. Dr. Vasquez, our people have always tracked the changes in ice, in weather patterns, in the timing of seasons. But working with the wood people, our ancestors learned to measure these changes with greater precision, to record them in ways that could be compared across many years. Elena photographed the preserved environmental samples and their accompanying documentation, recognizing that she was looking at the earliest known systematic climate monitoring in the Arctic. The Norse-Inuit partnership had developed methods for tracking temperature changes, ice formation patterns, ocean current variations, and seasonal timing that provided baseline data for understanding long-term environmental trends. The collaborative climate records showed evidence of medieval warming and cooling periods that matched modern paleoclimatic research, but with far greater detail and accuracy than scientists had previously achieved for this time period. Elena realized that this discovery would revolutionize understanding of both historical climate patterns and indigenous environmental knowledge systems. The Norse-Inuit collaboration had created a climate monitoring network that preserved crucial data about Arctic environmental changes across centuries of observation. As afternoon light filtered through the cave openings, Elena and Kai completed their documentation of the most remarkable archaeological discovery either had ever witnessed. Elena packed her equipment carefully, ensuring that every artifact, photograph, and measurement had been properly recorded according to both scientific standards and cultural protocols that Kai had outlined. The collaboration caves had revealed evidence of cross-cultural scientific cooperation that was unprecedented in medieval archaeology, systematic research methods, collaborative instrument development, integrated knowledge systems, and long-term environmental monitoring that represented genuine scientific advances achieved through partnership between Norse and Inuit cultures. Kai performed closing acknowledgement protocols, offering gratitude to the ancestors who had worked in these chambers and asking permission to share their knowledge with the modern world in ways that would honor their collaborative spirit. Elena watched respectfully, understanding that her archaeological work was only meaningful when it connected properly with living cultural traditions that had preserved these sites across generations. Kai, what we've documented here changes everything about understanding medieval science, Arctic exploration, and indigenous knowledge systems, Elena said as they prepared to leave the cave. But more importantly, it proves that your people's traditional knowledge preserved accurate historical information and scientific methods that academic institutions are only beginning to appreciate. Kai nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Vasquez, our elders always taught that knowledge belongs to all people when it's shared with proper respect. The wood people and ice people understood this 1,000 years ago. Maybe it's time for the modern world to remember these lessons. Elena secured her documentation materials one final time, knowing that she carried evidence that would revolutionize academic understanding of medieval collaborative science while validating indigenous knowledge systems that had maintained cultural and scientific traditions across a millennium. The return journey to the research station took them across ice formations that glowed like amber in the Arctic evening light. Elena and Kai traveled in comfortable silence, both processing the extraordinary significance of what they had documented in the collaboration caves. Elena carried her archaeological equipment with special care, knowing that the photographs, measurements, and samples represented evidence that would fundamentally change understanding of medieval science and cross-cultural collaboration. Kai navigated their return route with the same traditional knowledge that had guided them safely to the cave sites, his understanding of Arctic travel ensuring their expedition remained safe despite the challenging terrain and changing weather conditions. As the research station's lights became visible in the distance, Elena began planning the complex process of presenting their discoveries to academic institutions, government agencies, and indigenous communities in ways that would honor all stakeholders while advancing scientific understanding. The collaboration caves had revealed that effective cross-cultural research required genuine partnership, mutual respect, and recognition that different knowledge systems could contribute unique value to shared understanding. Kai, how do we make sure that sharing this discovery serves your community's interests and protects the cultural heritage we've documented? Elena asked as they approached the station. The Inuit guide considered her question carefully, Dr. Vasquez, the old collaboration worked because both peoples benefited, both peoples contributed, and both peoples were respected as equals. If we can create that same kind of partnership with modern institutions, then sharing this knowledge will honor our ancestors and help future generations. Elena nodded, understanding that the archaeological discovery was only the beginning of building contemporary collaborative relationships that could address current environmental and cultural challenges using wisdom preserved from medieval partnerships. That evening, Elena presented the cave discoveries to the full team. The laboratory transformed into a comprehensive display of archaeological evidence that demonstrated the sophistication of medieval Norse, Inuit scientific collaboration. Professor Anders was practically vibrating with excitement as Elena described the astronomical observatory, the collaborative climate monitoring systems, and the systematic research methods documented in the cave records. Elena, Kai, what you found here represents the most significant discovery in medieval Arctic archaeology in decades, Anders said, adjusting his glasses to study the detailed photographs. This evidence of systematic collaborative science predates similar European developments by centuries. Marcus studied the documentation with growing amazement, his earlier skepticism gradually giving way to recognition of the discovery's extraordinary significance. The climate monitoring records particularly captured his attention, sophisticated environmental observation methods that connected directly to his own research interests while providing baseline data that could enhance current climate science understanding. Elena, I owe you an apology, Marcus said finally. I was so focused on our specific research objectives that I couldn't see how this discovery actually enhances everything we're trying to accomplish here. These collaborative climate records could revolutionize understanding of historical Arctic environmental patterns. Kai provided cultural context throughout Elena's presentation, explaining how traditional knowledge systems had preserved information about the collaboration sites while protecting them from exploitation. His interpretation of the indigenous elements in the collaborative research methods demonstrated the sophisticated integration of different knowledge systems that had made the medieval partnership so scientifically productive. Elena concluded her presentation by emphasizing that the discovery's full significance could only be understood through continued collaboration between scientific institutions and indigenous communities, honoring the same principles of mutual respect and shared benefit that had made the original Norse-Inuit partnership successful. Elena spent the evening making carefully planned phone calls to academic institutions, government agencies, and cultural heritage organizations, knowing that news of the discovery would spread quickly once it entered official channels. Each conversation required delicate balance, conveying the extraordinary significance of the findings, while emphasizing the need for collaborative approaches that respected indigenous cultural protocols and community interests. Her first call was to Dr. Sarah Martinez at the Smithsonian's Arctic Studies Center, a colleague who specialized in cross-cultural archaeological projects and understood the importance of community collaboration in heritage research. Sarah, I'm calling about a discovery that's going to change everything we know about medieval Norse. Inuit contact. But before I share details, I need assurance that any institutional response will center indigenous community leadership in research and interpretation decisions. Elena's second call was to the Danish National Museum, whose Arctic Archaeology Department would have legitimate interest in Norse exploration discoveries, but whose institutional approach might not prioritize indigenous perspectives. Elena knew that managing competing institutional interests would require careful coordination to ensure that the discovery served scholarly advancement while protecting community heritage rights. Her third call was to Martha Tutu, Kai's cousin and representative on the Regional Cultural Heritage Council. This conversation was crucial. Elena needed community approval before sharing detailed information with academic or government institutions, and she wanted to ensure that indigenous leadership shaped how the discovery was studied and interpreted. Martha, Kai, and I have documented collaboration sites that validate traditional knowledge about historical partnerships between our peoples and Norse explorers. We want your community's guidance on how this information should be shared with outside institutions. Elena knew that the success of her archaeological work would ultimately be measured not just by its scientific significance, but by its contribution to advancing indigenous knowledge, recognition, and community self-determination in heritage research. The response from academic institutions was immediate and intense. Elena's phone began ringing within hours of her initial contacts as news of the discovery spread through informal networks connecting Arctic researchers, medieval historians, and archaeological specialists. Dr. Martinez called back with excitement barely contained in her professional voice. "Elena, based on your preliminary description, this could be the most significant medieval Arctic discovery since the Greenland settlements. The Smithsonian wants to support whatever research approach the indigenous community approves." The Danish National Museum response was more complex, expressing strong interest while hinting at potential claims based on the Norse heritage aspects of the discovery. Elena knew this would require careful negotiation to ensure that academic interests served community benefits rather than institutional prestige. Government agencies also began making contact. The Greenlandic Cultural Heritage Department, Danish archaeological authorities, and even Canadian institutions with interests in Arctic indigenous research. Elena coordinated with Kai to ensure that all external communications emphasized community leadership in determining how the discovery would be studied and interpreted. "Dr. Vasquez," Kai said as they reviewed the institutional responses, "my cousin Martha wants to convene the Cultural Heritage Council for an emergency meeting. The community needs to discuss how to approach this level of outside attention while protecting our interests and honoring our ancestors." Elena nodded, understanding that community consultation wasn't just culturally appropriate, it was essential for ensuring that the archaeological discovery served broader goals of indigenous knowledge, recognition, and community empowerment. The next phase of the project would require navigating complex institutional politics while maintaining focus on collaborative principles that honored both scientific advancement and cultural heritage protection. The video conference with Kai's Cultural Heritage Council represented a crucial moment in determining how the discovery would be managed and shared with the outside world. Elena participated respectfully in the community consultation, understanding that her role was to provide information and technical expertise, while the council maintained decision-making authority about their cultural heritage sites. Martha Tutu led the discussion with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to protecting community interests in negotiations with outside institutions. "Dr. Vasquez, our people appreciate your respectful approach to these sacred sites, but we need clear agreements about how this knowledge will be shared and who will control the research process." Elena responded carefully, emphasizing her commitment to collaborative principles that centered community leadership. "Martha, council members, I want to be absolutely clear that this discovery belongs to your community first. My role is to provide technical documentation and academic interpretation that serves your community's goals and respects your cultural protocols." The council discussed various approaches to managing institutional interest, weighing the benefits of academic collaboration against the risks of losing control over their cultural heritage narrative. Elder council members shared traditional knowledge about the collaboration sites that provided additional context for understanding their historical and cultural significance. Younger council members raised concerns about ensuring that any research partnerships would provide tangible benefits to the community, educational opportunities, economic development, and enhanced recognition of traditional knowledge systems. After 2 hours of careful discussion, the council reached a consensus approach. They would support collaborative research that centered indigenous leadership, provided community benefits, and maintained cultural protocol requirements for all external partnerships. Elena accepted the council's conditions gladly, recognizing that community-led research would produce better science while advancing important goals of indigenous knowledge, recognition, and cultural self-determination. Elena worked through the night, developing a research proposal that would satisfy academic institutional standards while centering indigenous community leadership and ensuring mutual benefit for all stakeholders. The document required careful balance, demonstrating scientific rigor that would attract institutional support while maintaining community control over research direction, interpretation, and benefit distribution. Kai reviewed each section of the proposal, ensuring that cultural protocols were properly integrated and that community interests remained paramount in all partnership arrangements. The proposal outlined a collaborative research model that was innovative in academic archaeology, community-led investigation teams, shared decision-making authority, indigenous knowledge integration as equal partner to Western scientific methods, and benefit-sharing agreements that provided tangible community advantages rather than just academic prestige. Elena drew on her experience with successful collaborative projects in other indigenous communities, adapting best practices for the unique circumstances of the Norse Inuit discovery, while ensuring that all arrangements respected the specific cultural protocols that Kai's council had established. The research timeline extended over 3 years, allowing for proper community consultation, careful site investigation, comprehensive documentation, and collaborative interpretation that would honor both scientific standards and traditional knowledge systems. Elena included detailed budgets that allocated significant resources to community capacity building, indigenous research training, and cultural heritage protection, rather than concentrating funding in external institutional hands. Kai, does this framework properly reflect your council's requirements for maintaining community leadership throughout the research process? Elena asked as she completed the proposal's final sections. Kai nodded approvingly. Dr. Vasquez, this approach honors the collaborative spirit that made the original partnership successful. Our ancestors would recognize these principles of mutual respect and shared benefit. Elena submitted the collaborative research proposal to carefully selected institutions, coordinating each submission with community council approval and ensuring that indigenous leadership remained central to all partnership discussions. The Smithsonian Arctic Studies Center received the first submission, based on their strong track record of community collaborative archaeological projects and their explicit commitment to indigenous knowledge recognition. The Danish National Museum required more careful approach. Elena's proposal emphasized that, while Norse heritage elements were significant, community leadership and indigenous perspectives would guide all interpretation and presentation decisions. Elena also submitted proposals to Canadian Arctic research institutions, Greenlandic cultural heritage agencies, and international collaborative archaeology programs that specialized in cross-cultural heritage projects. Each submission included detailed protocols for community consultation, indigenous knowledge integration, and benefit sharing arrangements that would ensure the discovery served community development goals while advancing academic understanding. Throughout the submission process, Elena maintained regular contact with Martha Tutu and the Cultural Heritage Council, ensuring that community representatives could review and approve all institutional communications before they were finalized. The proposal included innovative elements that pushed academic archaeology toward more equitable partnership models. Community researchers would receive equal credit with academic investigators. Traditional knowledge would be recognized as equivalent to Western scientific methods, and interpretation decisions would require community approval before publication or presentation. Elena knew that some institutions might resist these collaborative requirements, but she was committed to working only with partners who genuinely supported indigenous leadership in heritage research. The response from institutions will tell us which partners truly support collaborative principles versus those who just want access to the discovery. Elena explained to Kai as they monitored early institutional reactions to the proposal submissions. Elena's worst nightmare materialized when her satellite phone exploded with incoming calls. Journalists, documentary producers, treasure hunting enthusiasts, and even a few conspiracy theorists who had somehow learned about the discovery before community consultation was complete. Her hands shook as she answered the 5th call in 10 minutes, each conversation more sensationalized than the last. "Dr. Vasquez, is it true you found Viking gold worth millions?" demanded a reporter from a tabloid archaeology magazine. "No, absolutely not," Elena replied firmly, but she could already hear the story being twisted in real time. A leak from one of the academic institutions had resulted in headlines screaming, "Viking treasure discovered in Greenland" and "Lost Arctic gold found by marine biologist," exactly the kind of sensationalized coverage that turned archaeological sites into target zones for looters and treasure hunters. Kai's face went pale as he scrolled through social media posts that were already spreading like wildfire across treasure hunting forums. "Dr. Vasquez, this is exactly what my people feared," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Once the treasure hunters hear about this, they'll come with boats and metal detectors. They won't care about cultural protocols or traditional knowledge. They'll just tear everything apart looking for gold that doesn't even exist. Elena felt sick to her stomach as she realized the magnitude of the crisis. Martha Tutu's emergency conference call was even more direct. Dr. Vasquez, we have exactly 24 hours to control this narrative before our cultural heritage sites become a circus. My people have seen what happens when outside institutions lose control of archaeological stories. Sacred sites get destroyed, traditional knowledge gets ignored, and communities lose their cultural heritage forever. The irony was crushing. Elena's careful efforts to maintain proper protocols had been undone by institutional leaks that she couldn't control. Martha, I take full responsibility for this disaster, Elena said, her voice heavy with guilt. My contacts weren't secure enough. How do we protect your community's interests now that this is spiraling out of control? The emergency response required immediate coordination between Elena's technical expertise and community leadership's cultural authority to protect the heritage sites from unauthorized access while managing the growing media attention responsibly. Martha Tutu led the community's crisis response with the calm authority of someone experienced in protecting indigenous interests from external exploitation. The Cultural Heritage Council quickly authorized enhanced security measures for the collaboration caves, drawing on traditional protocols for protecting sacred sites while adapting to contemporary threats from treasure hunters and unauthorized researchers. Elena contributed her knowledge of academic and legal systems to help the community navigate institutional claims and media management, while Kai organized local protection measures using both traditional knowledge and modern security techniques. The community's response demonstrated sophisticated understanding of heritage protection. They immediately filed legal notifications establishing their cultural authority over the sites, contacted sympathetic journalists to provide accurate cultural context for the story, and activated networks with other indigenous communities who had successfully protected their archaeological heritage from exploitation. Elena worked to counter-sensationalize media coverage by providing technical information that emphasized the scientific and cultural significance of the discovery rather than treasure hunting appeal. She coordinated with academic allies who could provide expert commentary that supported community leadership and collaborative research principles. Martha, I want to propose that your community take the lead in all media communication about this discovery, Elena suggested during their emergency planning session. Your voices should be central to how this story gets told, not secondary to academic or government perspectives. The Community Council approved Elena's suggestion, recognizing that controlling their own narrative was essential for protecting their heritage rights while ensuring that the discovery's significance was understood in proper cultural context rather than sensationalized terms. Elena stepped back into a supportive role as Martha Tutu and other community representatives took the lead in media communications, providing technical assistance while ensuring that indigenous voices remained central to how the discovery was presented to the public. The community's media strategy was sophisticated and culturally grounded. They emphasized the collaborative nature of the historical partnership, the ongoing importance of traditional knowledge systems, and the community's leadership in contemporary research decisions. Elena helped prepare background materials that supported community messaging, providing scientific context that reinforced cultural interpretations while countering treasure hunting sensationalism that threatened to overshadow the discovery's real significance. Martha proved to be an excellent media spokesperson, combining traditional knowledge authority with contemporary communication skills that effectively conveyed the community's perspective to journalists and documentary producers. This discovery validates what our elders have always taught about the collaborative relationships between our ancestors and Norse explorers, Martha explained during her first television interview. But more importantly, it demonstrates that traditional knowledge systems preserve accurate historical information that academic institutions are only beginning to appreciate. Elena provided technical background during media interviews, but always in support of community leadership rather than as the primary expert voice. She emphasized that her archaeological work was only meaningful when it served community interests and contributed to advancing indigenous knowledge recognition. The community-led media strategy proved highly effective at shifting public attention from treasure hunting sensationalism to cultural collaboration and scientific significance. Educational media outlets began featuring stories about traditional knowledge validation and collaborative research methods, while treasure hunting interest diminished as the community's cultural authority over the sites became well established. Elena watched with satisfaction as the community successfully controlled their heritage narrative, recognizing that this outcome honored the collaborative principles that had made the original Norse-Inuit partnership successful. After a week of careful crisis management and media coordination, the Community Cultural Heritage Council formally approved Elena's collaborative research proposal, establishing a partnership framework that maintained indigenous leadership while enabling scientific investigation that could advance academic understanding and community interests simultaneously. The approval ceremony took place in the research station's main room, which had been arranged according to community protocols that honored both traditional decision-making processes and contemporary legal requirements for heritage protection agreements. Martha Tutu presented the council's decision with the formal authority of someone representing centuries of traditional governance systems adapted to contemporary challenges. Dr. Vasquez, our council approves this research partnership because you have demonstrated genuine respect for our cultural protocols and commitment to collaborative principles that honor both our traditional knowledge and your scientific expertise. Elena accepted the community's approval with deep gratitude, understanding that the partnership represented extraordinary trust from people who had experienced too many examples of academic exploitation and institutional appropriation of indigenous heritage. The collaborative agreement included innovative provisions that pushed archaeological practice toward more equitable models. Community researchers would receive training and certification in academic documentation methods. Traditional knowledge holders would have equal authority with university-trained archaeologists in interpretation decisions, and all research publications would include indigenous authors as equal partners rather than consultants. The partnership also established benefit-sharing arrangements that would support community cultural education programs, traditional knowledge preservation initiatives, and economic development projects that aligned with community values and priorities. Elena signed the collaborative agreement with the recognition that her archaeological career was being transformed from individual academic achievement toward genuine partnership with indigenous communities in advancing shared understanding of cultural heritage. Martha, this partnership honors the same collaborative spirit that made the original Norse-Inuit relationship successful, Elena said during the ceremony. I'm committed to ensuring that our research serves your community's goals while contributing to academic understanding that respects indigenous knowledge systems. The formal archaeological investigation began with a collaborative team that represented the partnership principles Elena and the community had worked to establish. University-trained researchers working alongside traditional knowledge holders, academic documentation methods integrated with indigenous interpretation systems, and community leadership guiding all research decisions. Elena found herself learning as much as teaching as she worked with community researchers who brought generational knowledge about the collaboration sites that no amount of academic training could provide. Mary Tutu, Martha's daughter and a recent graduate in Indigenous Studies, proved particularly skilled at bridging traditional knowledge with contemporary research methods, offering interpretations that enhanced Elena's understanding while ensuring cultural protocols were maintained throughout the investigation. The collaborative methodology produced richer documentation than either traditional academic archaeology or indigenous knowledge alone could achieve. Community researchers identified cultural significance that Elena's training hadn't recognized, while Elena's technical skills enabled systematic recording that preserved details for future study and community educational programs. Elder knowledge holders provided crucial context for understanding the historical collaboration, sharing traditional stories that matched archaeological evidence with remarkable accuracy while offering cultural interpretation that brought the ancient partnership to life. Elena documented everything using both academic standards and community protocols, ensuring that research materials would serve scholarly advancement while remaining accessible and useful for community cultural education and traditional knowledge preservation. Elena, working together like this, feels like continuing the collaboration that our ancestors and the Norse people started 1,000 years ago, Mary observed, as they documented astronomical instruments in the cave observatory. Elena nodded, recognizing that their contemporary partnership was indeed honoring the same principles of mutual respect, shared learning, and collaborative advancement that had made the medieval relationship so remarkably productive. As the collaborative investigation continued, Elena and the community research team discovered additional cave chambers that revealed the full scope of the Norse-Inuit partnership. Extensive workshops where both cultures had developed technological innovations, storage areas containing supplies for multi-seasonal research projects, and living spaces that provided evidence of long-term cultural exchange and collaboration. The newly discovered section showed that the collaboration had been far more extensive than even the longship evidence had suggested. Elena worked with traditional knowledge holders to identify cultural elements in the expanded site while documenting technological achievements that represented genuine scientific advances through collaborative innovation. One chamber contained metalworking equipment that combined Norse techniques with indigenous knowledge of Arctic materials, producing tools and instruments that were uniquely adapted to Arctic conditions, while showing mathematical precision that neither culture had achieved independently. Another section revealed textile production areas where Norse weaving techniques had been adapted using indigenous Arctic materials and methods, creating clothing and equipment that provided superior protection in extreme cold, while demonstrating aesthetic collaboration between the two cultural traditions. Elder community researchers provided crucial interpretation for understanding how the collaborative workspace had functioned, identifying activity areas and organizational systems that reflected traditional indigenous approaches to community research, while incorporating Norse systematic documentation methods. Elena documented the expanded evidence systematically, but found that her most important role was supporting community researchers in developing their own technical skills while learning from their cultural expertise. The scope of this collaboration site suggests that the partnership lasted for multiple years, possibly even generations, Elena observed, as they explored a chamber containing evidence of tool manufacturing that required sustained technological cooperation. Mary nodded, consulting traditional knowledge that her grandmother had shared. Our stories speak of several seasons when the Ice People and Wood People worked together, sharing knowledge about surviving in the Arctic while creating new tools and methods that helped both peoples. The most extraordinary discovery came when Elena and the community team documented navigation technology that demonstrated the Norse-Inuit collaboration had achieved Arctic wayfinding capabilities that surpassed contemporary European technology by several centuries. The instruments combined Norse metalworking precision with traditional Inuit knowledge of ice patterns, wind direction, and astronomical observation in ways that created navigation accuracy, unmatched by any medieval European exploration technology. Elena carefully documented instruments that could predict ice formation timing, track seasonal animal migration patterns, and calculate position using stellar observations, adapted specifically for Arctic conditions where traditional Mediterranean-based navigation methods were inadequate. Community researchers provided crucial interpretation for understanding how traditional knowledge had been integrated into the technological innovations, identifying indigenous wayfinding elements that enabled precise Arctic navigation using environmental indicators that Norse explorers would never have recognized independently. One particularly sophisticated instrument combined multiple navigation functions, magnetic compass adapted for Arctic magnetic variations, astronomical calculator for determining position using northern stellar patterns, and environmental indicator system that incorporated traditional knowledge about ice conditions, weather patterns, and seasonal timing for safe Arctic travel. Elder knowledge holders confirmed that traditional stories described exactly these kinds of collaborative innovations, validating the archaeological evidence through oral traditions that had preserved accurate technical information across 1,000 years. Elena realized she was documenting evidence that the Norse-Inuit partnership had achieved navigation technology that wouldn't be matched by European exploration until the development of modern scientific instruments centuries later. This collaboration produced technology that was genuinely ahead of its time. Elena observed as she photographed an astrolabe that incorporated traditional Arctic star knowledge with Norse mathematical precision. Neither culture could have achieved this level of navigation accuracy working independently, but together they created instruments that solved Arctic exploration challenges that European technology couldn't address for hundreds of years. As the investigation continued, Elena and the community research team uncovered evidence that the Norse-Inuit collaboration had established what amounted to a permanent Arctic research station, a sophisticated facility designed for long-term environmental monitoring, technological development, and cultural exchange that operated for multiple seasons and possibly even generations. The cave system revealed organizational structures that supported sustained collaborative research projects, with dedicated areas for different types of investigation, storage facilities for long-term material preservation, and living spaces that accommodated researchers from both cultures during extended periods of collaborative work. Elena documented evidence of systematic environmental monitoring that had collected Arctic climate data across multiple years, technological development projects that required sustained collaboration to achieve their sophisticated results, and cultural exchange programs that enabled both peoples to learn from each other's knowledge systems while developing innovative solutions to Arctic survival and exploration challenges. Community researchers provided traditional knowledge that confirmed the archaeological evidence, sharing stories about ancestors who had participated in multi-seasonal collaborative projects that combined Norse systematic documentation with indigenous long-term environmental observation. The permanent research station represented a level of medieval collaborative science that had no equivalent in contemporary European academic institutions, demonstrating that cross-cultural partnership had enabled scientific achievements that wouldn't be matched by individual cultural efforts for centuries. Elder knowledge holders described traditional understanding of the collaboration as a formal alliance that had benefited both peoples through shared learning, technological innovation, and enhanced capability for Arctic survival and exploration. Elena recognized that they were documenting evidence of the earliest known permanent Arctic research facility, operated through principles of collaborative investigation that modern academic institutions were only beginning to implement effectively. This wasn't just occasional contact between two cultures, Elena observed, as she documented evidence of multi-year research projects. This was a formal partnership that created the first collaborative Arctic research station in recorded history. The success of the collaborative research project attracted unwanted attention from government agencies who attempted to claim jurisdiction over the heritage sites based on international maritime law and archaeological significance, arguments that ignored indigenous cultural authority and community rights. Elena found herself supporting community legal defense efforts led by Martha Tutu, who had quickly assembled a team of indigenous rights attorneys experienced in protecting cultural heritage from institutional appropriation. The legal challenge represented exactly the kind of external exploitation that indigenous communities had experienced for centuries. Government agencies and academic institutions claiming authority over cultural heritage, based on technical legal arguments that dismissed community sovereignty and traditional knowledge systems. Elena provided technical documentation that supported community legal arguments, emphasizing that the collaboration sites represented living cultural heritage that remained connected to contemporary indigenous knowledge systems rather than abandoned archaeological resources subject to government appropriation. Martha coordinated the community's legal response with the strategic expertise of someone who had protected indigenous interests against institutional claims throughout her career in cultural heritage advocacy. The community's defense strategy combined traditional governance authority with contemporary legal frameworks, asserting cultural sovereignty over heritage sites while demonstrating that community-led research served broader scientific and educational goals more effectively than government-controlled investigation. Elena's role shifted from archaeological researcher to technical witness supporting community rights, providing scientific evidence that validated indigenous cultural authority while demonstrating that collaborative research principles produced better outcomes than institutional appropriation. Elena, your technical documentation provides crucial evidence that these sites represent living cultural heritage rather than abandoned archaeological resources, Martha explained during their legal strategy session. Your support for community leadership helps demonstrate that collaborative research serves scientific advancement while respecting indigenous sovereignty. Elena understood that the legal challenge threatened not just this specific discovery, but the broader principle of community authority over cultural heritage that was essential for advancing indigenous rights and collaborative research relationships. Elena's testimony in the legal proceedings provided crucial scientific evidence supporting community cultural authority over the heritage sites, demonstrating that collaborative research had produced better archaeological outcomes while respecting indigenous sovereignty and traditional knowledge systems. Her expert witness role required careful balance, providing technical evidence that validated community rights while avoiding academic language that might undermine indigenous authority or suggest that scientific validation was necessary for community sovereignty. Elena emphasized that the archaeological evidence confirmed traditional knowledge rather than discovering previously unknown information, supporting community arguments that the heritage sites remained connected to living cultural traditions rather than representing abandoned resources subject to government appropriation. Her testimony highlighted the superior scientific outcomes achieved through collaborative research, demonstrating that community-led investigation had produced more comprehensive understanding than traditional academic archaeology, while advancing both scholarly knowledge and community cultural education goals. Martha Tutu led the community's legal arguments with the strategic expertise of someone experienced in protecting indigenous rights against institutional appropriation, using Elena's technical evidence to support broader arguments about community sovereignty and cultural self-determination. The legal proceedings attracted significant media attention, providing opportunities for the community to educate the public about indigenous rights and collaborative research principles, while challenging assumptions about government authority over cultural heritage. Elena's testimony proved particularly effective because it demonstrated that supporting community leadership enhanced rather than diminished scientific rigor, countering institutional arguments that government control was necessary for proper archaeological investigation. Dr. Vasquez's testimony clearly shows that collaborative research respects both scientific standards and indigenous cultural authority, Martha argued during closing statements. Community-led investigation has produced superior archaeological outcomes while honoring the traditional knowledge systems that preserve this heritage across generations. Elena felt honored to support community rights through her scientific expertise, recognizing that the legal victory would establish important precedents for indigenous heritage protection and collaborative research development. The legal victory established crucial precedents for indigenous heritage protection while formally recognizing the community's cultural authority over the collaboration sites and their right to determine how archaeological research would be conducted and interpreted. Elena joined the community celebration with deep satisfaction, knowing that the successful defense of indigenous rights would benefit collaborative research relationships throughout the Arctic while advancing broader goals of community sovereignty and cultural self-determination. Martha Tutu had led the legal effort with extraordinary skill, combining traditional governance authority with contemporary legal strategies to protect community interests while demonstrating that indigenous leadership enhanced rather than hindered scientific advancement and heritage preservation. The victory attracted positive media attention that educated the public about indigenous rights and collaborative research principles, providing opportunities for other communities to learn from successful strategies for protecting cultural heritage from institutional appropriation. Elena's role in supporting community legal arguments had strengthened her understanding of how archaeological work could serve broader social justice goals, transforming her career from individual academic achievement toward genuine partnership with indigenous communities in advancing shared understanding and cultural protection. The legal recognition of community authority over the heritage sites also attracted institutional support from academic organizations that wanted to participate in collaborative research partnerships, providing opportunities for expanding the project while maintaining community leadership and cultural protocol requirements. Elena worked with Martha to develop frameworks for managing institutional partnerships that would enhance research capabilities while protecting community interests and ensuring that collaborative principles remain central to all archaeological investigation and interpretation decisions. Elena, this victory validates everything our ancestors taught about working together as equals, Martha said during the celebration. Your support for our community leadership shows that the old collaboration spirit can still guide modern partnerships between our peoples and academic institutions. Elena understood that the legal victory was just the beginning of building sustainable collaborative relationships that could address contemporary challenges using wisdom preserved from historical partnerships. With community authority established and institutional recognition secured, Elena worked with Martha to develop a permanent collaborative research program that combined marine biology with archaeological investigation while maintaining indigenous leadership throughout all academic partnerships and research decisions. The expanded program attracted support from institutions that genuinely embraced collaborative principles, creating opportunities for interdisciplinary research that served both scientific advancement and community cultural education goals. Elena's role evolved from individual researcher to coordinator of collaborative partnerships, ensuring that all institutional relationships respected community protocols while contributing resources and expertise that enhanced research capabilities without threatening indigenous authority over heritage interpretation and cultural education programs. The program's innovative structure provided models for other collaborative research relationships, demonstrating that community leadership could enhance scientific rigor while advancing social justice goals and indigenous knowledge recognition throughout academic institutions. Martha maintained overall program leadership with the authority of someone representing traditional governance systems adapted to contemporary research collaboration, ensuring that community interests remain central to all partnership decisions while expanding opportunities for traditional knowledge preservation and cultural education development. Elena coordinated marine biology research that connected the historical climate monitoring evidence with contemporary environmental science, providing opportunities for traditional knowledge holders to contribute current environmental observation expertise while learning contemporary scientific methods that enhance their community's capability for environmental monitoring and protection. The collaborative program also established training opportunities for community researchers, providing pathways for indigenous students to develop technical skills while maintaining connections to traditional knowledge systems and community cultural values. Elena, this program honors the collaborative spirit that made the original partnership successful while addressing contemporary challenges that require both traditional knowledge and modern science, Martha observed as they planned the program's expansion. Elena agreed, recognizing that their contemporary collaboration was indeed continuing the innovative partnership spirit that had enabled remarkable achievements through cultural cooperation 1,000 years earlier. The expanded collaborative investigation revealed that the Norse-Inuit partnership had developed climate prediction methods that exceeded medieval European capabilities by centuries, combining traditional indigenous environmental knowledge with Norse systematic observation techniques to create forecasting accuracy that wouldn't be matched by European science until the development of modern meteorology. Elena worked with community researchers to document instruments and records that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of climate cycles, weather pattern prediction, and environmental change, monitoring that provided practical forecasting capabilities for Arctic survival and exploration. Traditional knowledge holders provided crucial interpretation for understanding how indigenous environmental observation had been integrated with Norse mathematical calculation methods, creating prediction systems that could anticipate seasonal timing, weather patterns, and ice formation conditions with remarkable accuracy for medieval technology. The climate prediction evidence connected directly to Elena's marine biology research, providing historical baseline data that enhanced contemporary environmental monitoring while demonstrating that traditional knowledge systems had preserved accurate environmental information across centuries of observation and cultural transmission. Elder community researchers confirmed that traditional stories described exactly these kinds of collaborative environmental monitoring projects, validating the archaeological evidence through oral traditions that had maintained detailed knowledge about historical climate science achievements through indigenous cultural preservation systems. Elena realized that the collaborative climate research represented genuine scientific advancement that challenged assumptions about medieval technological capabilities, while demonstrating that cross-cultural partnership could produce innovations that exceeded individual cultural achievements by substantial margins. This climate prediction technology shows that indigenous knowledge and Norse systematic methods created environmental science that was genuinely ahead of its time, Elena observed, as she documented instruments that incorporated traditional environmental indicators with mathematical precision. Community researcher Mary nodded, adding traditional interpretation. Our ancestors understood that predicting climate changes required both careful observation across many generations and systematic recording methods that could preserve patterns for future reference. As Elena completed the comprehensive archaeological documentation of the collaboration sites, Martha coordinated community development of a permanent cultural education center that would present the Norse-Inuit partnership history according to indigenous perspectives while serving ongoing traditional knowledge preservation and community educational goals. The Cultural Center represented the culmination of collaborative research principles, scientific investigations serving community interests while advancing academic understanding, indigenous leadership controlling heritage interpretation while engaging productively with institutional partnerships, and traditional knowledge validation through archaeological evidence while maintaining cultural authority over historical narrative presentation. Elena's final documentation phase ensured that all archaeological evidence was properly recorded according to both scientific standards and community protocols, creating research materials that would support community educational programs while contributing to academic understanding of medieval collaborative science and cross-cultural partnership achievements. The Cultural Center's development demonstrated community capacity for managing heritage tourism and educational programming that could provide economic benefits while protecting cultural values and maintaining traditional knowledge systems through contemporary institutional frameworks. Elena worked with community educators to develop interpretive materials that presented the collaborative research findings in ways accessible to diverse audiences while centering indigenous perspectives and traditional knowledge contributions throughout historical narrative presentation. The center also established ongoing research partnerships with academic institutions that respected community leadership while providing technical support for continued archaeological investigation and traditional knowledge preservation projects. Elena, this cultural center will ensure that our ancestors' collaborative spirit continues to guide relationships between our community and outside institutions, Martha explained, as they planned educational programming that would present the Norse-Inuit partnership as a model for contemporary cross-cultural cooperation. Elena recognized that the center represented successful transformation of archaeological discovery into community-controlled cultural education that served both heritage preservation and contemporary social justice goals, while advancing public understanding of indigenous knowledge systems and collaborative research principles. Elena's presentation to the International Arctic Archaeology Conference marked a watershed moment for collaborative research methodology, with Martha Tutu serving as co-presenter to demonstrate that community leadership enhanced rather than hindered scientific advancement while providing models for genuine partnership between indigenous communities and academic institutions. The presentation emphasized that archaeological discovery was only meaningful when it served community interests and contributed to indigenous knowledge recognition, challenging traditional academic approaches that prioritized institutional prestige over collaborative principles and cultural respect. Elena provided technical archaeological evidence, while Martha interpreted cultural significance and community perspectives, demonstrating that indigenous knowledge and scientific methodology could work together as equal partners in advancing understanding while protecting cultural heritage and supporting community self-determination goals. The international audience included representatives from academic institutions, government agencies, and indigenous communities who were seeking models for collaborative research that could advance scientific understanding while respecting cultural sovereignty and traditional knowledge systems. Elena emphasized that the Norse-Inuit discovery's significance lay not just in its historical importance, but in its demonstration that collaborative research produced superior outcomes while advancing social justice goals and indigenous rights, recognition throughout academic institutions and heritage protection frameworks. Martha's presentation focused on community benefits from collaborative research, describing how archaeological investigation had strengthened traditional knowledge preservation, provided educational opportunities for community members, and established economic development through cultural tourism that respected indigenous values while generating sustainable community benefits. The presentation attracted significant interest from international institutions seeking to develop genuine, collaborative partnerships with indigenous communities, providing opportunities for expanding collaborative research methodology while maintaining community leadership and cultural protocol requirements throughout all academic partnerships. This project demonstrates that archaeological research serves communities best when it operates according to collaborative principles that honor both scientific standards and indigenous cultural authority. Elena concluded during the presentation. Martha added, "Our ancestors' collaborative spirit provides guidance for modern partnerships that can address contemporary challenges while preserving traditional knowledge for future generations." The international recognition Elena and Martha received for their collaborative archaeology work validated community-led research methodology while demonstrating that genuine partnership between indigenous communities and academic institutions could advance both scientific understanding and social justice goals more effectively than traditional academic approaches. Elena insisted that all awards and recognition be shared equally with community leadership, emphasizing that archaeological discovery was only meaningful when it served indigenous interests and contributed to traditional knowledge preservation and community cultural education goals. Martha accepted the Heritage Preservation Awards on behalf of her community with the authority of someone representing traditional governance systems that had successfully protected cultural heritage while engaging productively with contemporary institutions and academic partnerships. The international recognition attracted positive attention to collaborative research principles, providing opportunities for other indigenous communities and academic institutions to learn from successful models of genuine partnership that respected cultural sovereignty while advancing scientific understanding and heritage preservation. Elena's academic career had been transformed from individual achievement-focused research toward collaborative methodology that centered community leadership and indigenous knowledge systems, demonstrating that supporting community authority enhanced rather than diminished scientific rigor and academic contribution. The awards also recognized the Community Cultural Center's innovative approach to heritage interpretation and traditional knowledge preservation, validating indigenous-led educational programming that presented historical narratives according to community perspectives while engaging diverse audiences in learning about cross-cultural collaboration and indigenous knowledge systems. Elena worked with Martha to use the international recognition as a platform for advocating collaborative research methodology throughout academic institutions, emphasizing that community-led investigation served scholarly advancement while advancing indigenous rights and cultural self-determination. These awards honor not just our specific project, but the collaborative principles that our ancestors developed 1,000 years ago, Martha reflected during the recognition ceremony. Elena agreed, understanding that their contemporary partnership had indeed honored the innovative collaboration spirit that had enabled remarkable achievements through cultural cooperation in the medieval Arctic. Elena worked with Martha to establish a long-term mentorship program that would connect indigenous students with collaborative research opportunities while ensuring that academic training enhanced rather than replaced traditional knowledge systems and community cultural values. The program represented innovative approaches to indigenous education that honored cultural sovereignty while providing technical skills that could serve community development and heritage preservation goals. Elena's role shifted toward educational coordination that supported community-controlled academic development, providing pathways for indigenous students to engage with contemporary research methods, while maintaining connections to traditional knowledge systems and cultural protocols that guided community decision-making and heritage interpretation. The mentorship program attracted support from academic institutions that genuinely embraced collaborative principles, creating opportunities for indigenous students to develop technical expertise while contributing to research projects that served community interests rather than just institutional academic advancement. Martha maintained oversight of cultural integration throughout the educational programming, ensuring that academic training supported traditional knowledge preservation and community cultural education rather than undermining indigenous value systems or encouraging students to abandon community connections. Elena developed curriculum that demonstrated how traditional knowledge and contemporary scientific methods could work together as equal partners in advancing understanding, providing students with skills that enhance their ability to serve community interests while engaging productively with outside institutions and academic opportunities. The program also established partnerships with other indigenous communities that were developing similar collaborative research relationships, creating networks for sharing successful strategies and supporting each other's efforts to maintain cultural sovereignty while engaging contemporary academic and institutional systems. Elena? This mentorship program honors the educational spirit that made the original collaboration successful while preparing our young people to continue protecting and advancing our community's interests, Martha observed as they planned expanded programming. Elena understood that the educational initiatives represented sustainable approaches to collaborative research that could continue advancing community goals and indigenous knowledge recognition across future generations. Elena's coordination of an international collaborative research network connected Arctic indigenous communities with academic institutions committed to genuine partnership principles, creating global frameworks for community-led heritage protection and traditional knowledge recognition that could advance both scientific understanding and indigenous rights throughout the Arctic region. The network represented expansion of collaborative methodology beyond individual projects towards systemic change in how academic institutions engage with indigenous communities, emphasizing community sovereignty and cultural protocol requirements throughout all research partnerships and heritage interpretation decisions. Elena worked with Martha to ensure that indigenous rights principles guided all network partnerships, providing technical coordination support while maintaining community leadership and cultural authority over research direction and heritage narrative presentation throughout the international collaborative framework. The network attracted participation from indigenous communities across the Arctic who were seeking academic partnerships that respected cultural sovereignty while providing technical resources for heritage protection and traditional knowledge. Projects that served community development and cultural education goals. Elena's role evolved toward facilitating partnerships rather than directing research, supporting community leadership while providing technical expertise that enhanced research capabilities without threatening indigenous authority over cultural heritage interpretation and community decision-making processes. Martha coordinated with other indigenous leaders to establish network principles that protected community interests while enabling productive collaboration with academic institutions that demonstrated genuine commitment to collaborative methodology and indigenous knowledge recognition. The international network also established protocols for sharing successful strategies among communities while protecting specific cultural knowledge that required community control and traditional governance oversight rather than widespread academic or institutional access. Elena, this network creates opportunities for our communities to learn from each other while maintaining control over our cultural heritage and traditional knowledge, Martha explained, as they plan network expansion. Elena recognized that the international collaborative framework represented sustainable approaches to community academic partnership that could continue advancing indigenous rights and heritage protection across future generations while contributing to academic understanding and environmental research that served broader global challenges. Elena's comprehensive research publication documented collaborative methodology while ensuring that community voices remain central to academic presentation of the Norse-Inuit partnership history, with Martha serving as co-author to demonstrate that indigenous perspectives guided scholarly communication rather than serving as supplementary consultation to academic authority. The publication challenged traditional academic approaches by presenting community knowledge and scientific methodology as equal partners in advancing understanding, providing models for collaborative research that other institutions could adapt while respecting cultural sovereignty and traditional knowledge systems. Elena worked with Martha to ensure that the publication served community educational goals while contributing to academic understanding, creating scholarly materials that supported traditional knowledge recognition and indigenous rights advocacy while meeting academic standards for peer review and institutional recognition. The publication process required careful navigation of academic systems that often prioritized institutional authority over community perspectives. But Elena and Martha's collaborative approach demonstrated that community leadership enhanced, rather than diminished, scholarly rigor and research contribution. The research documentation emphasized that archaeological discovery was only meaningful when it served community interests and contributed to indigenous knowledge validation. challenging academic institutions to examine their own practices and develop genuine partnership approaches that respected cultural sovereignty while advancing scientific understanding. Martha's co-authorship provided crucial cultural interpretation throughout the scholarly presentation, ensuring that indigenous perspectives shaped academic narrative rather than being relegated to supplementary acknowledgement or consultation status within traditional academic authority structures. The publication attracted significant attention within academic archaeology and indigenous studies fields, providing opportunities for other communities and institutions to learn from successful collaborative methodology while advancing broader discussions about academic responsibility and community partnership principles. Elena, this publication shows that community voices can guide academic communication while maintaining scholarly standards that serve both traditional knowledge preservation and contemporary research advancement, Martha observed as they completed the writing process. Elena understood that the collaborative publication represented sustainable approaches to community academic partnership that could continue advancing indigenous knowledge, recognition, and collaborative research methodology throughout academic institutions. Elena walked through the thriving Community Cultural Center with Martha, observing educational programs that demonstrated how collaborative research had transformed into sustainable community-controlled heritage interpretation that served both cultural preservation and public education while providing economic benefits that supported traditional knowledge preservation and community development goals. Her career had been fundamentally transformed from individual academic achievement toward genuine partnership with indigenous communities, demonstrating that supporting community leadership enhanced rather than diminished scientific contribution while advancing social justice goals and indigenous rights recognition throughout academic institutions. The Cultural Center's success validated collaborative research principles that Elena and Martha had developed, showing that community-led heritage interpretation could engage diverse audiences while maintaining cultural sovereignty and traditional knowledge authority throughout educational programming and heritage narrative presentation. Elena reflected on how the Norse Inuit discovery had enabled her to contribute to advancing indigenous knowledge recognition while developing research methodology that other academic institutions could adapt for genuine partnership with community leadership and cultural protocol requirements. The center's educational programs demonstrated successful integration of traditional knowledge with contemporary research methods, providing pathways for indigenous students to develop technical skills while maintaining connections to cultural values and community decision-making systems that guided heritage protection and traditional knowledge preservation. Martha's leadership throughout the project had shown Elena how traditional governance systems could engage productively with contemporary institutions while maintaining cultural authority and community control over research direction and heritage interpretation decisions. Elena recognized that her most important academic contribution lay not in individual discovery, but in supporting community authority and demonstrating that collaborative research could advance both scientific understanding and indigenous rights while providing models for sustainable community academic partnership. Martha, working with your community has taught me that the most meaningful archaeological research serves community interests while advancing academic understanding through genuine partnership rather than institutional appropriation. Elena reflected as they observed successful educational programming. Martha nodded, understanding that their collaboration had honored the same partnership spirit that had enabled remarkable achievements through cultural cooperation 1,000 years earlier. Elena participated respectfully in a community ceremony that honored the ancestors who had created the original Norse-Inuit collaboration while celebrating the contemporary partnership that had preserved and shared their legacy according to traditional cultural protocols and community values. Martha led the ceremonial acknowledgement with the authority of someone representing traditional governance systems that connected contemporary community decisions with ancestral wisdom and cultural continuity that guided heritage protection and collaborative research methodology. The ceremony demonstrated community control over heritage celebration, while recognizing Elena's contribution to advancing indigenous knowledge recognition and supporting community leadership throughout archaeological investigation and cultural interpretation decisions. Elena understood that her participation in the traditional ceremony represented acceptance into ongoing cultural relationships that extended beyond individual research projects towards sustained commitment to collaborative principles and community partnership that honored indigenous sovereignty while advancing shared understanding. The ceremonial acknowledgement connected the historical Norse-Inuit collaboration with contemporary community academic partnership, demonstrating cultural continuity that preserved traditional knowledge while engaging productively with modern institutions and research opportunities that served community development and heritage preservation goals. Community members shared traditional stories about the ancestral collaboration that validated archaeological evidence while providing cultural interpretation that brought historical partnership to life through oral traditions that had preserved accurate information across generations of community knowledge preservation. The ceremony also established ongoing commitments between Elena and the community for continued collaboration that would support traditional knowledge preservation, community educational programming, and heritage protection activities that advanced indigenous rights and cultural self-determination while contributing to academic understanding and research methodology development. Elena, this ceremony welcomes you into ongoing relationships with our community that honor the collaborative spirit our ancestors developed with the Norse people, Martha explained during the ceremonial acknowledgement. Elena felt deeply honored to be included in traditional protocols that connected her academic work with cultural relationships that extended across generations of community decision-making and heritage preservation activities. Elena's permanent research position represented institutional commitment to collaborative methodology that centered community leadership while providing technical support for indigenous-led archaeological projects throughout the Arctic region, demonstrating that academic institutions could adapt their practices to honor cultural sovereignty while advancing scientific understanding through genuine partnership principles. The research facility was designed according to community input and cultural protocols that ensured indigenous perspectives remained central to all research activities, with Martha maintaining ongoing liaison authority that guided institutional decisions and ensured community interests were protected throughout academic partnerships and heritage investigation projects. Elena's new role focused on supporting other communities in developing collaborative research relationships while documenting successful methodologies that other academic institutions could adapt for genuine partnership with indigenous communities and traditional knowledge systems. The permanent position validated Elena's career transformation from individual academic achievement toward collaborative research that served community interests while advancing scientific understanding, providing institutional recognition that community-led investigation enhanced rather than diminished academic contribution and research quality. Elena worked with Martha to establish ongoing partnerships with multiple indigenous communities that were seeking academic support for heritage protection and traditional knowledge, preservation projects that respected cultural sovereignty while providing technical resources for community-controlled research and educational programming. The research facility also served as a training center for other academic researchers who wanted to develop collaborative skills and cultural competency for working with indigenous communities according to traditional protocols and contemporary partnership principles. Elena's permanent position enabled continued support for the original community's cultural center and educational programming while expanding collaborative research opportunities that could advance indigenous rights recognition and heritage protection throughout academic institutions and research frameworks. Elena, this permanent position ensures that our partnership will continue serving community interests while advancing collaborative research methodology that other institutions can learn from, Martha observed as they planned ongoing research activities. Elena understood that the institutional commitment represented sustainable approaches to community, academic partnership that could continue advancing indigenous knowledge, recognition and collaborative research principles across future generations of academic and community collaboration. Elena's comprehensive documentation of the collaborative research project demonstrated remarkable achievements in advancing indigenous rights, heritage protection, and academic methodology through community-led partnership principles that had transformed both individual careers and institutional approaches to archaeological investigation and cultural heritage interpretation. The project had successfully established community authority over heritage sites while enabling scientific investigation that served both academic understanding and community cultural education goals, providing models for collaborative research that other institutions could adapt while respecting indigenous sovereignty and traditional knowledge systems. Elena worked with Martha to assess the project's comprehensive impact, recognizing that their collaboration had advanced heritage protection, indigenous rights recognition, community educational programming, academic methodology development, and institutional transformation toward genuine partnership principles that centered community leadership throughout research and interpretation decisions. The documentation showed that collaborative research had produced superior scientific outcomes while advancing social justice goals, challenging academic institutions to examine their practices and develop partnership approaches that respected cultural sovereignty while contributing to scholarly understanding and heritage preservation activities. Elena's career transformation from individual academic achievement toward collaborative community partnership had demonstrated that supporting indigenous leadership enhanced rather than diminished scientific contribution, providing personal and professional validation for choosing community service over institutional prestige and individual recognition within traditional academic systems. The project had also established sustainable frameworks for ongoing collaboration that would continue advancing community interests and indigenous knowledge recognition across future generations of research and heritage protection activities, creating lasting institutional change that honored traditional governance principles while engaging contemporary academic and research opportunities. Martha's leadership throughout the project had shown that traditional knowledge systems could guide contemporary research while maintaining cultural authority and community control over heritage interpretation and educational programming that served both cultural preservation and public education goals. Elena, this documentation shows that our collaboration honored the same partnership spirit that made the original Norse-Inuit relationship successful while addressing contemporary challenges through traditional wisdom and modern research capabilities, Martha reflected as they reviewed comprehensive project achievements. Elena understood that their contemporary partnership had indeed continued the innovative collaboration spirit that had enabled remarkable achievements through cultural cooperation in the medieval Arctic. Elena returned to the original dive site where her discovery had begun, now accompanied by community research team members who continued ongoing investigation according to traditional protocols and collaborative methodology that honored both scientific standards and indigenous cultural authority over heritage interpretation and site protection activities. The underwater scene reflected her journey from individual academic researcher toward genuine partnership with community leadership, demonstrating that collaborative research had transformed both personal career and institutional approaches to archaeological investigation while advancing heritage protection and indigenous rights recognition. The preserved Longship site now operated under community protection that ensured cultural protocols guided all research activities while enabling continued investigation that served both academic understanding and community educational programming throughout ongoing heritage preservation and traditional knowledge documentation projects. Elena reflected on how the discovery had enabled her to contribute to advancing indigenous knowledge recognition while developing research methodology that demonstrated the superior outcomes achieved through community-led investigation compared to traditional academic approaches that prioritized institutional authority over cultural sovereignty and community partnership principles. The underwater archaeology continued under community leadership, with Elena providing technical support that enhanced research capabilities while respecting traditional governance systems and cultural decision-making authority that guided heritage protection and interpretation activities according to indigenous values and community development goals. The dive site had become a model for collaborative heritage protection that attracted international attention while maintaining community control over research direction and cultural narrative presentation, demonstrating that indigenous leadership could advance both scientific understanding and heritage preservation while protecting cultural values and traditional knowledge systems. Elena's role had evolved from discoverer to supporter of community research activities, providing technical expertise that enhanced community capabilities while learning from traditional knowledge systems that offered perspectives and methodologies that academic training alone could never provide. Elena, Diving here now feels like continuing the collaborative spirit that our ancestors and the Norse people created in these same waters, observed Mary Tutu as they documented ongoing preservation efforts. Elena understood that their contemporary research partnership honored the same innovative collaboration principles that had enabled remarkable achievements through cultural cooperation 1,000 years earlier in the Arctic waters where it all began. The international conference that Elena and Martha hosted attracted academic researchers and indigenous leaders from around the world who were seeking models for collaborative research that could advance both scientific understanding and community self-determination, while respecting cultural sovereignty and traditional knowledge systems throughout heritage protection and research activities. Elena's presentation emphasized that collaborative methodology had produced superior scientific outcomes while advancing social justice goals, demonstrating that supporting community leadership enhanced rather than diminished academic contribution, while providing frameworks for genuine partnership between indigenous communities and research institutions. Martha's leadership of conference programming ensured that indigenous perspectives remained central to all discussions about collaborative research development, with community voices guiding conversations about academic institutional transformation and partnership principles that could advance heritage protection and traditional knowledge recognition throughout international research networks. The conference attracted participation from universities, government agencies, and indigenous communities who were developing similar collaborative relationships, providing opportunities for sharing successful strategies while learning from different cultural contexts and research challenges that required adaptation of partnership principles to specific community needs and institutional circumstances. Elena worked with Martha to ensure that conference outcomes would support community-controlled research development while advancing academic understanding of collaborative methodology that respected cultural protocols and traditional governance systems throughout partnership decision-making and heritage interpretation activities. The international recognition validated collaborative research principles while providing platforms for advocating institutional change that could advance indigenous rights and community authority over cultural heritage throughout academic systems and research frameworks that historically had prioritized institutional prestige over community benefit and cultural respect. Conference participants committed to developing ongoing networks for supporting collaborative research that would continue advancing community interests, while contributing to academic understanding and heritage protection activities that served both scientific advancement and social justice goals through genuine partnership principles. This conference demonstrates that the collaborative spirit our ancestors developed can guide contemporary partnerships that address current challenges while honoring traditional wisdom, Martha observed during closing ceremonies. Elena understood that the international recognition represented validation of collaborative principles that could continue advancing indigenous knowledge, recognition, and community partnership throughout future generations of academic and community research collaboration. Elena's concluding reflection on the complete research journey emphasized her transformation from individual academic achievement toward collaborative community partnership that had advanced indigenous rights, heritage protection, and research methodology, while demonstrating that genuine partnership enhanced both scientific understanding and social justice outcomes through community-led investigation and cultural sovereignty recognition. Her presentation highlighted how supporting community leadership had produced superior research results, while contributing to institutional change that benefited indigenous communities throughout the Arctic region, providing models for collaborative methodology that other academic institutions could adapt while respecting traditional knowledge systems and cultural protocols. Elena acknowledged that her most important academic contribution lay not in archaeological discovery, but in demonstrating that collaborative research could serve community interests while advancing scientific understanding through partnership principles that honored indigenous governance systems and traditional knowledge authority throughout heritage protection and educational programming activities. The journey had shown that effective collaboration required genuine commitment to community leadership and cultural sovereignty rather than superficial consultation that maintained institutional authority while appropriating indigenous knowledge for academic advancement and institutional prestige without providing meaningful community benefits or recognition. Elena's career transformation represented broader changes needed throughout academic institutions to develop authentic partnership relationships with indigenous communities that could advance both scholarly understanding and community self-determination, while respecting cultural values and traditional governance systems that guide heritage protection and knowledge preservation. Martha's partnership leadership had demonstrated that traditional knowledge systems could guide contemporary research while maintaining cultural authority and community control over heritage interpretation and educational programming that served both cultural preservation and public education goals through indigenous-controlled narrative presentation. Elena concluded by emphasizing ongoing commitment to collaborative research that would continue advancing community interests while contributing to academic understanding and heritage protection activities that honored the same partnership spirit that had enabled remarkable achievements through cultural cooperation in the medieval Arctic. This journey has taught me that the most meaningful research serves community interests while advancing academic understanding through genuine partnership that honors traditional knowledge and cultural sovereignty. Elena reflected during her final presentation. The audience recognized that Elena's transformation represented models for academic institutional change that could advance both scientific understanding and indigenous rights through collaborative research principles that centered community leadership and cultural authority throughout research and heritage protection activities. Elena sat respectfully in the traditional storytelling circle as community elders shared oral histories that connected the historical Norse, Inuit collaboration with contemporary research partnership achievements, demonstrating cultural continuity that preserved traditional knowledge while engaging productively with modern institutions and research opportunities. The elders' stories provided rich cultural context that brought archaeological evidence to life through oral traditions that had maintained accurate historical information across generations of community knowledge preservation, validating scientific findings while offering indigenous perspectives that academic training alone could never provide. Martha facilitated the cultural knowledge sharing with deep respect for traditional protocols and elder authority, ensuring that Elena understood how contemporary partnership honored the same collaborative principles that had guided ancestral relationships between Norse explorers and indigenous Arctic communities. The storytelling circle represented community control over heritage narrative presentation, with elders determining which traditional knowledge could be shared with outside researchers while maintaining cultural authority over interpretation and educational content that connected historical partnerships with contemporary collaboration. Elena listened carefully to stories that described specific details about the ancestral collaboration, seasonal timing for joint research projects, cultural protocols for sharing knowledge between different peoples, and traditional methods for preserving collaborative achievements through oral tradition and cultural practice that continued serving community education and identity formation. The elder stories also provided guidance for continuing contemporary collaboration according to traditional principles that honored both cultures while advancing shared understanding and mutual benefit through genuine partnership rather than academic appropriation or institutional exploitation of indigenous knowledge systems. Elena recognized that participating in traditional storytelling represented acceptance into ongoing cultural relationships that extended beyond individual research projects, towards sustained commitment to community partnership and heritage protection that would continue serving indigenous interests across future generations. These stories teach us that successful collaboration requires patience, respect, and commitment to serving both peoples equally, explained Elder Sarah Tutu, Martha's grandmother. Elena understood that the traditional stories provided wisdom for maintaining collaborative relationships that could continue advancing community interests while contributing to academic understanding through genuine partnership principles. Elena worked with Martha to establish an annual scholarship program that would support indigenous students in developing archaeological and marine biology research skills while ensuring that academic training enhanced rather than replaced traditional knowledge systems and community cultural values throughout educational development and professional preparation. The scholarship program represented innovative approaches to indigenous education that honored cultural sovereignty while providing technical skills that could serve community heritage protection, environmental monitoring, and cultural education goals through research careers that remained connected to traditional governance and community decision-making systems. Elena's commitment to supporting indigenous students demonstrated that collaborative research principles could create sustainable pathways for community capacity building that advance both academic understanding and community self-determination, while maintaining cultural authority over research direction and heritage interpretation throughout professional development and career advancement. The program attracted support from academic institutions and organizations that genuinely embraced collaborative principles, providing opportunities for indigenous students to develop expertise that could serve community interests while engaging productively with outside institutions and research opportunities that respected traditional knowledge and cultural protocols. Martha maintained oversight of cultural integration throughout the scholarship program, ensuring that academic training supported traditional knowledge preservation and community cultural education rather than encouraging students to abandon community connections or adopt institutional values that conflicted with indigenous governance systems and cultural identity formation. Elena developed curriculum that demonstrated how traditional knowledge and contemporary scientific methods could work together as equal partners in advancing understanding, providing students with skills that enhanced their ability to serve community heritage protection and environmental monitoring, while maintaining connections to cultural values and traditional decision-making processes. The scholarship program also established mentorship relationships between scholarship recipients and community elders, ensuring that academic training remained grounded in traditional knowledge systems while developing technical capabilities that could advance community goals and indigenous rights recognition throughout research institutions and environmental protection agencies. Elena. This scholarship program ensures that our young people can develop technical skills while maintaining their connections to traditional knowledge and community values, Martha observed during the program announcement. Elena understood that supporting indigenous education represented sustainable approaches to collaborative research that could continue advancing community interests and heritage protection across future generations of community leadership and academic partnership. Elena coordinated the final documentation of project outcomes that demonstrated successful integration of traditional knowledge with contemporary research methodology, creating comprehensive records that could guide future collaborative research while serving community heritage protection and educational development goals throughout ongoing partnership activities and institutional relationships. The documentation showed that community-led investigation had produced superior scientific outcomes while advancing indigenous rights, recognition, heritage protection, and academic methodology development through genuine partnership principles that respected cultural sovereignty and traditional governance systems throughout research and interpretation decisions. Elena worked with Martha and community representatives to assess collaborative research achievements, recognizing that their partnership had established sustainable frameworks for ongoing collaboration that would continue serving community interests while contributing to academic understanding and institutional transformation toward more equitable research practices. The comprehensive documentation included detailed methodological guides that other academic institutions could adapt for developing genuine partnership relationships with indigenous communities, emphasizing community leadership and cultural protocol requirements throughout all research activities and heritage interpretation decisions. Elena's documentation also highlighted the superior research outcomes achieved through collaborative methodology, demonstrating that traditional knowledge and scientific investigation enhanced each other when combined through respectful partnership rather than academic appropriation or institutional exploitation of indigenous knowledge systems. Martha's contributions to the final documentation ensured that community perspectives remained central to all project assessment and methodology presentation, providing indigenous interpretation that brought collaborative principles to life through cultural authority and traditional governance systems that guided heritage protection and community development activities. The project documentation established clear protocols for maintaining collaborative relationships across institutional changes and personnel transitions, ensuring that partnership principles would continue guiding research activities even as specific individuals completed their involvement with ongoing heritage protection and educational programming. Elena recognized that the comprehensive documentation represented her most important academic contribution, not individual discovery, but demonstration that collaborative research could serve both scientific advancement and social justice goals through genuine partnership with indigenous communities and traditional knowledge systems. Elena, this documentation preserves our collaborative achievements while providing guidance for future partnerships that can continue honoring traditional knowledge and community authority. Martha reflected during final project assessment. Elena understood that their documentation would continue advancing collaborative research principles and indigenous rights recognition across future generations of academic and community partnership development. Elena returned to her original climate research objectives with dramatically enhanced understanding that connected medieval Norse, Inuit environmental collaboration with contemporary climate monitoring, demonstrating how traditional knowledge could improve modern environmental science while validating indigenous observation methods that had preserved accurate climate information across centuries of cultural transmission. The collaborative research had revealed that historical climate monitoring methods developed through Norse-Inuit partnership provided baseline data that enhanced contemporary understanding of Arctic environmental patterns, while demonstrating the sophisticated scientific capabilities that traditional knowledge systems had maintained throughout generations of indigenous cultural practice. Elena worked with Martha to integrate traditional environmental observation methods with contemporary climate research, creating monitoring systems that combined modern scientific instruments with indigenous indicators that provided more comprehensive understanding of Arctic environmental changes and climate pattern variations. The enhanced climate research demonstrated that traditional knowledge offered perspectives and methodologies that academic environmental science alone could not achieve, providing validation for indigenous observation systems while advancing contemporary climate monitoring through collaborative integration of different knowledge systems and cultural approaches to environmental understanding. Elena's presentation of enhanced climate findings attracted significant attention from environmental research institutions that recognize the superior outcomes achieved through traditional knowledge integration, providing opportunities for expanding collaborative environmental monitoring throughout Arctic regions while maintaining community authority over traditional knowledge sharing and interpretation. Martha's contributions to the enhanced climate research ensured that indigenous perspectives remained central to environmental monitoring interpretation, providing traditional knowledge that improved scientific understanding while maintaining cultural authority over how traditional observation methods were presented and utilized within contemporary research frameworks. The integration of historical and contemporary environmental science created comprehensive understanding of Arctic climate patterns that served both academic research and community environmental protection goals, demonstrating that collaborative methodology could advance environmental science while supporting indigenous rights and traditional knowledge recognition. Elena recognized that connecting medieval collaboration evidence with contemporary environmental monitoring represented genuine scientific advancement that honored traditional knowledge while contributing to climate research that could serve broader environmental protection and community adaptation goals. Elena. This enhanced climate research shows how traditional knowledge can improve modern environmental science while validating our ancestors' sophisticated understanding of Arctic environmental patterns, Martha observed during research presentation. Elena understood that their collaborative environmental research honored the same innovative partnership spirit that had enabled remarkable environmental monitoring achievements through cultural cooperation in the medieval Arctic. Elena established a permanent Arctic research collaboration network that connected multiple indigenous communities across the Arctic region with academic institutions committed to traditional knowledge integration and community-led heritage protection, creating international frameworks for collaborative research that advanced both environmental science and indigenous rights recognition throughout circumpolar partnerships. The network represented systematic expansion of collaborative methodology beyond individual projects toward institutional transformation that prioritized community leadership and cultural sovereignty throughout Arctic research activities, environmental monitoring, and heritage protection initiatives that served both academic understanding and community development goals. Elena coordinated network activities, while Martha provided indigenous rights oversight that ensured all collaborative partnerships respected traditional governance systems and cultural protocols throughout research decision-making and knowledge-sharing activities that maintained community authority over traditional knowledge interpretation and heritage narrative presentation. The Arctic Research Network attracted participation from indigenous communities throughout Alaska, northern Canada, Greenland, and northern Scandinavia who were seeking academic partnerships that genuinely supported community interests while providing technical resources for environmental monitoring and heritage protection activities that advanced traditional knowledge preservation and community self-determination. Elena's coordination role focused on facilitating partnerships rather than directing research activities, providing technical support that enhanced community research capabilities while maintaining indigenous leadership and cultural authority over research direction and interpretation decisions throughout collaborative environmental monitoring and heritage protection projects. The network established protocols for sharing successful collaborative strategies among communities while protecting specific traditional knowledge that require community control and traditional governance oversight, rather than widespread academic or institutional access that could threaten cultural sovereignty or traditional knowledge integrity. Martha worked with other indigenous leaders throughout the Arctic to establish network principles that protected community interests while enabling productive collaboration with academic institutions that demonstrated genuine commitment to traditional knowledge recognition and community partnership throughout environmental research and heritage protection activities. Elena recognized that the International Arctic Network represented sustainable approaches to collaborative research that could continue advancing indigenous rights and environmental protection across future generations while contributing to academic understanding and climate research that served broader global environmental challenges. Elena, this Arctic network creates opportunities for our communities to share knowledge and strategies while maintaining control over our traditional knowledge and cultural heritage, Martha explained during network planning sessions. Elena understood that the international collaborative framework honored the same partnership principles that had enabled remarkable achievements through cultural cooperation in the medieval Arctic while addressing contemporary environmental and cultural challenges. Elena received lifetime achievement recognition for her contributions to advancing collaborative archaeology and indigenous rights, but insisted that Martha share the recognition equally as demonstration that community leadership was the foundation for meaningful academic contribution and sustainable research partnership that served both scientific understanding and social justice goals. The Lifetime Achievement Award validated Elena's career transformation from individual academic achievement toward genuine partnership with indigenous communities, demonstrating that supporting community authority enhanced rather than diminished academic contribution while advancing heritage protection and traditional knowledge recognition throughout research institutions. Elena's acceptance speech emphasized that her most important academic contributions had emerged through collaboration with Martha and her community, highlighting how traditional knowledge and indigenous governance systems had guided research methodology that produced superior outcomes while advancing both scientific understanding and community interests through genuine partnership principles. Martha's shared recognition acknowledged community leadership and traditional knowledge contributions that had enabled collaborative research success, demonstrating that indigenous perspectives were essential partners rather than supplementary consultants in advancing archaeological understanding and heritage protection activities that served both academic and community goals. The Lifetime Achievement recognition attracted international attention to collaborative research methodology, providing platforms for advocating institutional change that could advance indigenous rights and community authority throughout academic systems and research frameworks that historically had prioritized institutional prestige over community benefit and cultural respect. Elena used the recognition ceremony to emphasize ongoing commitment to collaborative research that would continue advancing community interests while contributing to academic understanding through partnership principles that honored traditional governance systems and cultural sovereignty throughout heritage protection and educational programming activities. The award also established Elena's permanent legacy as advocate for collaborative research principles that could guide future academic and community partnerships in advancing both scientific understanding and indigenous rights recognition throughout research institutions and heritage protection frameworks. Martha's shared recognition validated traditional knowledge authority and community leadership in guiding research activities, demonstrating that indigenous governance systems could effectively direct academic partnerships while maintaining cultural control over heritage interpretation and traditional knowledge preservation throughout contemporary institutional relationships. Elena, sharing this recognition, demonstrates that meaningful academic achievement requires genuine partnership with communities rather than individual academic accomplishment, Martha observed during the ceremony. Elena understood that the lifetime achievement recognition honored collaborative principles that could continue advancing indigenous knowledge, recognition, and community partnership throughout future generations of academic and community research collaboration. Elena visited the collaboration caves one final time with the community research team, reflecting on the remarkable transformation from individual archaeological discovery to community-controlled heritage preservation that now served ongoing cultural education, traditional knowledge documentation, and indigenous rights advancement through sustainable community management and interpretation activities. The cave sites operated under complete community authority, with sophisticated preservation protocols that protected the collaboration evidence while enabling continued research and educational programming that served both cultural preservation and public education goals through indigenous-controlled narrative presentation and heritage interpretation. Elena's final visit represented closure of her direct involvement with site investigation, while celebrating successful transition to community management that would continue preserving and interpreting the Norse-Inuit collaboration according to traditional protocols and cultural values that honored ancestral achievements while serving contemporary community development and educational goals. The community research team had developed remarkable expertise in archaeological documentation and heritage preservation, demonstrating that collaborative research had successfully transferred technical skills while maintaining cultural authority and traditional knowledge systems that guided ongoing heritage protection and interpretation activities. Elena reflected on how the collaboration sites had enabled her greatest academic contribution, not archaeological discovery itself, but demonstration that community-led research could advance both scientific understanding and indigenous rights through genuine partnership that respected cultural sovereignty while contributing to academic knowledge and heritage protection. The cave system now served as both protected heritage site and active educational facility that attracted visitors from around the world while maintaining community control over interpretation and cultural narrative presentation that emphasized indigenous perspectives and traditional knowledge contributions to historical and contemporary collaboration. Elena's final documentation focused on successful community management strategies that other indigenous communities could adapt for protecting their own heritage sites while engaging productively with academic institutions and heritage tourism opportunities that respected cultural values and traditional governance systems. The community researchers expressed gratitude for Elena's collaborative approach, while emphasizing their ongoing commitment to preserving and sharing the collaboration heritage according to traditional protocols that honored ancestral achievements while serving contemporary community education and cultural preservation goals. Elena, your respectful approach to our heritage has helped our community develop capabilities for protecting and sharing our ancestors' collaborative achievements according to our cultural values, observed Mary Tutu during the final visit. Elena understood that the successful transition to community heritage management represented sustainable approaches to collaborative research that could continue serving indigenous interests while advancing academic understanding and heritage protection across future generations. Elena completed her final academic publication by ensuring that Martha and community researchers served as primary authors while she provided supporting editorial assistance, demonstrating that meaningful scholarly communication required indigenous voices to control academic narrative presentation rather than serving as supplementary consultation to academic authority and institutional prestige concerns. The publication represented innovative approaches to scholarly communication, that challenged traditional academic authorship hierarchies by centering community perspectives and traditional knowledge systems throughout research presentation, interpretation, and methodology discussion that validated indigenous knowledge while advancing collaborative research principles. Elena's supporting role in the publication process emphasized that her most important academic contribution lay in facilitating community voices rather than claiming individual credit for collaborative achievements that had emerged through genuine partnership with indigenous knowledge systems and traditional governance authority that guided heritage protection and research activities. Martha's primary authorship provided crucial indigenous interpretation throughout the scholarly presentation, ensuring that traditional knowledge perspectives shaped academic understanding rather than being relegated to supplementary acknowledgement or consultation status within traditional institutional authority structures that often appropriated indigenous knowledge without providing proper recognition or community benefit. The publication attracted significant attention within academic archaeology and indigenous studies fields, while demonstrating that community-controlled scholarly communication could meet rigorous academic standards while advancing social justice goals and indigenous rights, recognition throughout research institutions and heritage protection frameworks. Elena worked with Martha to ensure that the publication served community educational goals while contributing to academic understanding, creating scholarly materials that supported traditional knowledge preservation and indigenous rights advocacy, while meeting institutional requirements for peer review and academic recognition that validated collaborative research methodology. The community-controlled publication also established protocols for academic institutions that wanted to develop genuine partnership relationships with indigenous communities, providing guidelines for scholarly communication that respected cultural sovereignty while advancing scientific understanding through collaborative research that served both academic and community interests. Elena recognized that facilitating indigenous authorship represented her most meaningful academic contribution, demonstrating that supporting community voices enhanced rather than diminished scholarly quality while advancing both scientific understanding and social justice goals through genuine partnership with traditional knowledge systems. Elena, your support for our community voices in academic publication shows that meaningful scholarly communication requires indigenous perspectives to guide research presentation rather than serving institutional academic authority, Martha observed during publication completion. Elena understood that community-controlled scholarly communication represented sustainable approaches to collaborative research that could continue advancing indigenous knowledge, recognition, and academic partnership throughout future generations of research and heritage protection activities. Elena participated in the closing community celebration that honored the complete collaborative research journey while establishing ongoing commitments to supporting indigenous-led heritage protection and traditional knowledge recognition that would continue advancing community interests and academic understanding through sustained partnership principles and cultural sovereignty respect. The celebration acknowledged extraordinary achievements that had emerged through genuine collaboration, heritage site protection, traditional knowledge validation, community capacity building, academic methodology transformation, and indigenous rights advancement that demonstrated the power of partnership based on mutual respect and shared benefit rather than institutional appropriation or academic exploitation. Martha led the cultural ceremony with traditional protocols that connected contemporary collaborative achievements with ancestral wisdom and cultural continuity, demonstrating community authority over heritage celebration while recognizing Elena's contributions to advancing indigenous knowledge, recognition, and supporting community leadership throughout research and interpretation activities. The community celebration included recognition of all participants who had contributed to collaborative research success, elders who had shared traditional knowledge, community researchers who had developed technical skills, and institutional partners who had genuinely supported community leadership rather than seeking to control or appropriate indigenous heritage for academic or institutional benefit. Elena's participation in the closing ceremony represented acceptance into ongoing cultural relationships that extended beyond individual research projects towards sustained commitment to collaborative principles and community partnership that honored indigenous sovereignty while advancing shared understanding and mutual benefit through genuine cultural cooperation. The celebration also established future commitments for continuing collaborative research that would support community educational programming, traditional knowledge preservation, and heritage protection activities while contributing to academic understanding and institutional transformation toward more equitable research practices and indigenous rights recognition. Elena reflected on how the collaborative research had transformed not only her academic career, but also her understanding of meaningful research relationships that could serve both scientific advancement and social justice goals through genuine partnership with indigenous communities and traditional knowledge systems. The community celebration emphasized that successful collaboration required long-term commitment to supporting community interests rather than short-term academic projects that appropriated indigenous knowledge without providing sustainable community benefits or recognition of traditional governance authority over cultural heritage and knowledge preservation. Elena, this celebration honors our collaborative journey while establishing ongoing relationships that will continue advancing our community's interests and traditional knowledge preservation, Martha observed during the ceremony. Elena understood that the closing celebration represented beginning of sustained partnership that would continue honoring collaborative principles across future generations of community and academic cooperation. Elena delivered her final reflection on the collaborative research transformation, emphasizing that meaningful academic contribution required genuine partnership with indigenous communities and traditional knowledge systems for advancing both scientific understanding and social justice through research relationships that honored cultural sovereignty while serving shared goals of knowledge advancement and community development. Her concluding presentation highlighted how supporting community leadership had produced superior research outcomes while contributing to institutional change that benefited indigenous communities throughout the Arctic region, demonstrating that collaborative methodology enhanced rather than diminished academic rigor while advancing heritage protection and traditional knowledge recognition. Elena acknowledged that her career transformation from individual academic achievement toward collaborative community partnership represented broader changes needed throughout academic institutions to develop authentic relationships with indigenous communities that could advance both scholarly understanding and community self-determination through research practices that respected cultural values and traditional governance systems. The final reflection emphasized ongoing commitment to collaborative research principles that would continue guiding her academic work while supporting community interests and indigenous rights recognition throughout future research activities and institutional partnerships that maintained community authority over cultural heritage and traditional knowledge preservation. Elena's presentation concluded with recognition that the Norse Inuit discovery had enabled her most important academic contribution, not archaeological findings themselves, but demonstration that community-led research could serve both scientific advancement and social justice goals through genuine partnership that honored traditional knowledge and cultural sovereignty throughout heritage protection and educational programming. Martha's partnership leadership had provided crucial guidance that demonstrated how traditional governance systems could direct contemporary research while maintaining cultural authority and community control over heritage interpretation and knowledge preservation activities that served both cultural education and academic understanding. Elena concluded by emphasizing that collaborative research principles honored the same partnership spirit that had enabled remarkable achievements through cultural cooperation in the medieval Arctic, providing wisdom for contemporary relationships that could address current challenges while advancing both community interests and academic understanding through sustained commitment to genuine partnership and mutual respect. The final presentation attracted international attention to collaborative research methodology while establishing Elena's permanent commitment to supporting indigenous-led heritage protection and traditional knowledge recognition throughout her continuing academic career and institutional partnerships. This collaborative research journey has taught me that meaningful academic work requires genuine partnership with indigenous communities and traditional knowledge systems for advancing both scientific understanding and social justice. Elena reflected during her concluding presentation. Elena understood that her transformation represented sustainable approaches to community academic collaboration that could continue advancing Indigenous rights and heritage protection while contributing to academic knowledge through partnership principles that honored cultural sovereignty and traditional governance authority across future generations of research and community cooperation. Elena looked directly into the camera with Martha beside her, both reflecting on the extraordinary journey they had shared over the past hour. This story of Dr. Elena Vasquez and the remarkable Norse-Inuit collaboration shows us something powerful about human nature. Elena began, her voice warm with the wisdom gained through genuine partnership. When different cultures approach each other with genuine respect and willingness to learn, they can achieve things that neither could accomplish alone. Martha nodded, adding her perspective with traditional knowledge authority. Our ancestors understood that true strength comes from working together, sharing knowledge, and honoring each other's wisdom. The Wood People and Ice People created something beautiful because they listened to each other with open hearts. Elena continued the reflection. Elena's transformation from individual researcher to collaborative partner demonstrates that meaningful achievement requires genuine relationships with communities and traditional knowledge systems. Her greatest discovery wasn't the longship or artifacts, it was learning that scientific advancement and social justice work best when they support each other through authentic partnership. The story had taken viewers through a complete emotional and intellectual journey, from initial archaeological excitement through cultural learning, institutional challenges, legal victories, and sustainable collaboration that honored both scientific advancement and Indigenous rights. Martha emphasized the continuing relevance. These lessons about collaboration, respect, and partnership remain just as important today as they were 1,000 years ago. Whether we're addressing climate change, protecting cultural heritage, or building better communities, we need the same spirit of genuine cooperation that our ancestors and the Norse people developed together. Elena concluded the reflection with universal application. Elena's story reminds us that the most meaningful work happens when we approach differences with curiosity rather than judgment, when we listen more than we speak, and when we commit to supporting each other's success rather than competing for individual achievement. If this journey with Elena and our community kept you engaged and inspired throughout the full story, that like button really helps other people discover these immersive tales that give you complete, satisfying narratives from beginning to end. Elena said with genuine appreciation for viewers who had invested their time in the comprehensive storytelling experience. Martha added her own encouragement. When you like and share stories like this, you're supporting not just entertainment, but educational content that honors Indigenous knowledge and demonstrates how different peoples can work together successfully. Elena continued with subscription invitation. Subscribe for more long adventures that give you complete, satisfying stories every time. Stories that respect cultural diversity while providing the kind of immersive experience that lets you really get to know characters and see meaningful transformation happen over time. The hosts emphasized the value of long-form storytelling that allowed for proper character development, cultural education, and emotional investment that shorter content couldn't achieve. Martha explained, "These longer stories give us time to share traditional knowledge and cultural perspectives properly, to show how collaboration really works, and to demonstrate that learning about different cultures enriches everyone's understanding." Elena added practical viewing suggestions. These long stories are perfect for weekend relaxation, evening unwinding after work, or any time you want to fully immerse yourself in a complete narrative that respects your intelligence and emotional investment. The subscription encouragement emphasized community building around respectful storytelling that honored cultural diversity while providing engaging entertainment that educated as well as entertained. Elena concluded, "Subscribing means you'll never miss these complete adventures that combine real science with historical mystery, professional characters with authentic cultural collaboration, and educational content with genuinely engaging storytelling that respects both entertainment value and cultural authenticity."